The teacup shattered, not dropped, not fumbled. Shattered, porcelain exploding against marble in a spray of Earl Grey and jagged shards that made every servant in the breakfast room freeze mid-breath. Evelyn Carrington, Duchess of Ironvale, stood at the head of the table she hadn't spoken at in 4 years. Her husband stopped chewing. His mistress, yes, right there at the table, draped in silks Evelyn's money bought, went pale. "Every coin you've spent," Evelyn said, voice flat as winter stone. "Every acre you've toured, every tenant who bows to you. It's mine. I built it. You just wore the title." Adrian's fork clattered to his plate, and that's when the real game began. If you want to see how a silent woman brought an empire to its knees and rebuilt it in secret, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. The thing about being invisible is that people forget you have hands. Evelyn had been the Duchess of Ironvale for 4 years, 2 months, and 16 days. In all that time, she'd spoken exactly 73 words at the breakfast table. She'd counted. It was something to do while Adrian droned on about crop rotations he didn't understand and hunting parties he'd never actually organized. This morning, she had 4 words prepared, but first she had to wait for Camille to sit down. Camille Devereaux wasn't officially Adrian's mistress. That would require paperwork, and Adrian hated paperwork. She was his estate consultant, though what she consulted on remained strategically vague. She wore consultation like a second skin, low-cut velvet, hair that cost more than most servants earned in a year, and a smile that suggested she knew exactly where every man in the room kept his secrets. She took the chair directly across from Evelyn, not beside Adrian. Across, like they were negotiations at a treaty table. Evelyn watched her settle in, watched Adrian's hand drift toward Camille's wrist in that casual, possessive way he'd never once used with his actual wife. The morning light cut through the tall windows of the breakfast room, turning Camille's champagne curls into something almost angelic. Evelyn picked up her teacup. "Good morning, darling," Adrian said, not looking at Evelyn. He never did. "Camille and I were just discussing the northern timber contracts. Fascinating stuff. She thinks we might renegotiate terms with the Whitmore Consortium." "Do you?" Evelyn said. Adrian blinked. Camille's smile didn't falter, but something tightened around her eyes. 3 words. Evelyn was already off script. "Well, yes," Adrian continued, recovering quickly. He had that aristocratic gift for pretending awkward moments simply didn't exist. "The market rates have shifted, and Camille believes the Whitmore Consortium doesn't hold our timber contracts," Evelyn said. "They haven't for 18 months. The room got very quiet. Adrian's hand, still halfway to the butter dish, paused. "I'm sorry?" "You should be," Evelyn said. She set her teacup down with deliberate care, the porcelain meeting the saucer without a sound. "But you're not sorry. You're confused. The Whitmore Consortium was bleeding us for undermarket rates, charging premium fees for substandard processing, and building a monopoly by buying out every competitor within 50 miles. So I dissolved the contract, absorbed the termination penalties, and renegotiated directly with the Ashford Mills Cooperative. We've seen a 32% increase in revenue since the transition." Camille's fork had stopped moving. Adrian stared at his wife like she'd started speaking Latin. "You... what?" "I also updated the estate ledgers," Evelyn continued, her voice as even as the accountant reading tax law. "Consolidated the household budgets, renegotiated the staff wages to prevent the union strike you didn't know was coming, and restructured the tenant leases so we're no longer vulnerable to the Agricultural Reform Act Parliament passed last spring. You missed the session. You were in Bath." Adrian's face was doing something complicated. "How do you even know about..." "The same way I know that the southern barley fields you think are fallow are actually under rotational rest because the soil samples I commissioned showed nitrogen depletion. Or that the broken grain mill you ordered replaced last year wasn't broken. It needed a 15-pound gear repair, which I arranged. The replacement would have cost 800 pounds. I saved you 785. She picked up her teacup again and took a sip. It had gone cold. "You've been managing the estate?" Adrian said slowly, like he was translating from a foreign language. "No," Evelyn said. "I've been running it." Camille set down her fork very carefully. "Adrian, perhaps we should discuss this in private." "Oh, don't leave on my account," Evelyn said. And for the first time in 4 years, she smiled at the breakfast table. It wasn't a kind smile. "You're a estate consultant, aren't you? Surely you want to hear about the estate." The air in the room had changed. Two of the serving staff had stopped pretending to arrange silverware. Mrs. Halloway, the head housekeeper, stood frozen in the doorway with a fresh pot of coffee, her expression caught somewhere between shock and vindication. Adrian found his voice. "Evelyn, this is highly irregular. If you had concerns about the estate management, you should have brought them to me, not gone behind my back." "Behind your back?" Evelyn's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "Adrian, you haven't looked at an estate report in 3 years. I didn't go behind your back. I went everywhere. You just never noticed." She stood, smoothing her skirts with hands that didn't shake. 4 years of practice had taught her that much. "Every tenant lease you've signed, I drafted it. Every crop rotation you've approved, I designed it. Every profit margin you've celebrated at your club, I built it." She paused, letting that settle. "The only thing you've actually managed is the title and the spending. Now see here," Adrian started, but Evelyn wasn't finished. "The hunting lodge you promised Lord Garrett, paid for with revenue from the sheep contracts I renegotiated. The new stables, funded by the wool exportation deal I brokered with the Manchester traders. Your membership at the Kensington Club? That's the quarterly surplus from the kitchen garden expansions." She walked toward the door, then stopped, turned back. "Oh, and Camille?" Evelyn's voice was almost friendly. "That consultation fee you're charging, the one listed as estate advisory services at £200 per month? I know it's padding. I've known for 7 months. I've been letting it continue because it gave me a paper trail of exactly how much Adrian values your expertise." Camille's face had gone from pale to red to something approaching marble. "I'll be in the study," Evelyn said, "with the real ledgers, the ones I've been keeping, all of them." She walked out. Behind her, she heard Adrian's chair scrape back, heard his voice rising in something between outrage and panic, heard Mrs. Halloway quietly say, "I'll fetch more coffee, Your Grace." Evelyn didn't look back. The study was on the second floor, tucked into the east wing where morning light fell in thick golden bars across the oak shelves. It had been Adrian's grandfather's once. Dark wood, leather chairs, the smell of old tobacco and older money. Evelyn had claimed it 2 years ago. Adrian hadn't noticed. He used the larger drawing room on the main floor when he needed to sign things, usually while half drunk and fully distracted. She closed the door behind her and locked it. The ledgers were in the third cabinet, behind a false panel she'd installed herself. Not because she didn't trust the servants. She trusted Mrs. Halloway and Peters, the estate manager, implicitly, but because secrecy had become habit. Survival, even. She pulled out the first volume, black leather, unmarked spine. Inside, 4 years of meticulous records. Every transaction, every contract, every negotiation. Her handwriting filled page after page, neat, precise, unforgiving. The door handle rattled. "Evelyn," Adrian's voice muffled through the wood, "open this door." "No, I'm your husband, and I'm your wife. Apparently that means different things to each of us." Silence. Then, "We need to talk about this." "We're talking. Properly, face to face." Evelyn looked at the door, then at the ledgers spread across the desk. Evidence. Proof. 4 years of invisible work made visible. She unlocked the door. Adrian stumbled in like he'd been leaning against it. His hair was disheveled. He'd been running his hands through it, the way he did when his gambling debts came due or his mother sent letters. His cravat was askew. He looked, Evelyn thought distantly, like a man whose world had just tilted sideways. "Explain," he said. "I did. At breakfast." "No, you made accusations, you threw numbers around, you humiliated me in front of the staff. I stated facts. If you felt humiliated, that's because the facts are humiliating." Adrian's jaw worked. He crossed to the desk, saw the ledgers, and went very still. "What are these?" "Records. 4 years of them. Every decision you think you made, I made. Every success you claimed, I built." He picked up the top ledger, flipped it open. His eyes skimmed the pages. Expenses, revenues, contracts, yields. His face did something complicated. "Why?" he said finally. It was, Evelyn realized, the first genuine question he'd asked her in years. Because the estate was dying, she said simply. When I married you, Iron Veil was 6 months from bankruptcy. Your father's debts, your brother's gambling, your mother's creative accounting. The tenants were one bad harvest from revolt. The staff hadn't been paid in full for 8 months. The fields were exhausted, the equipment was failing, and the creditors were circling. We were fine. You were catastrophically not fine. You just didn't know it because nobody told you. Evelyn pulled out another ledger, opened it to a marked page. Here, your father's private loans, £73,000 at 18% interest, compounding quarterly, due in full within 5 years of his death. Adrian stared at the numbers. That's not possible. It was very possible. It's also resolved. I restructured the debt, negotiated down to 9% fixed, extended the term to 15 years, and paid off the highest interest tranches early using revenue from the new wool contracts. She turned more pages. Here's the tenant situation. 42 families, half on year-to-year leases that gave them no security and no loyalty. I converted them to 5-year renewable terms with profit-sharing clauses on surplus yields. Productivity increased 40% in the first 18 months. Another page. Equipment. Your grain mill, your wool press, your threshing equipment, all outdated, all inefficient. I didn't replace them. I upgraded them in phases, using revenue surplus so it didn't impact the operating budget. Another. Staff wages. You were paying below market rate and wondering why you couldn't keep good people. I implemented a tiered system with performance incentives. Staff turnover dropped from 30% annually to less than 5%. She kept going, page after page, contract after contract, decision after decision. Adrian sank into the chair across from her. Where did you even learn? Books, Evelyn said. The library has an entire section on estate management that nobody's touched in decades. Agricultural journals, trade reports. I also wrote to every estate manager between here and Scotland asking for advice. Most of them wrote back. Some even visited. Visited? Here? Not here. The village. I met them at the inn. Used a different name. She paused. Your staff knew. Mrs. Halloway, Peters, the senior household. They helped. They kept the secret because they wanted the estate to survive. Adrian's face was doing something she'd never seen before. It wasn't anger. Anger she knew. Anger was predictable. This was something raw. You did all of this, he said slowly, and never told me. I tried. In the first month. Evelyn's voice was flat. I brought you the debt documents. You told me not to worry about household matters. I brought you the tenant complaints. You said Peters handled that. I brought you the equipment reports. You were leaving for London. After 6 attempts, I stopped trying. So you just took over. I kept us from drowning. There's a difference. Adrian stood abruptly, paced to the window. Outside, the grounds of Iron Veil stretched in careful, calculated beauty. Gardens she'd redesigned, fields she'd reorganized, fences she'd repaired. He was looking at it like he'd never seen it before. Maybe he hadn't. Camille, he said quietly. She doesn't actually know anything about estate management, does she? No. And you've been letting us... He turned back. Why? If you were doing all this, why let her pretend to advise me? Evelyn met his eyes. Because I needed to know if you'd notice. If you'd look at a single contract, check a single number, question a single decision. She paused. You never did. The silence that followed was heavy enough to drown in. I'm not a fool, Adrian said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. No, Evelyn agreed. You're just lazy and careless and so convinced of your own competence that it never occurred to you to verify it. He flinched. But you're not stupid, she continued, and that's why I'm showing you this now, because the estate is stable enough to survive your ignorance, but not stable enough to survive what's coming next. Adrian's head snapped up. What's coming next? Evelyn pulled out a letter. The paper was expensive, the handwriting precise. She'd received it 3 days ago. Malcolm Grayson, she said. He's a property investor from London. Made his fortune buying struggling estates, carving them up, selling the pieces. He's been circling Iron Veil for months. We're not struggling. He doesn't know that. Nobody knows that. On paper, we still look vulnerable. Old debts, transitional management, traditional structure. He thinks we're ripe for acquisition. She slid the letter across the desk. He's made an opening offer. Very generous, very tempting, very insulting. Adrian scanned the letter. His expression darkened. This is a fraction of what the estate's worth. Yes, but he's not offering to buy the whole thing. He wants the river corridor, the water rights, the mills, the access routes. If we lose that, we lose our transportation network, our processing capacity, and our negotiating power with every supplier between here and Manchester. Then we refuse. It's not that simple. Evelyn pulled out another document. He has leverage. Someone's been feeding him information, property surveys, lease terms, revenue estimates, details that should be private. Adrian's face went pale. You think I... No. I think you talked. At your club, at parties, in conversations you thought were harmless. I think you mentioned things in passing, dropped numbers to impress people, answered questions you didn't realize were strategic. She paused. I think Camille asked the right questions, and you gave her the wrong answers. The implication hung in the air like smoke. She wouldn't, Adrian started. Wouldn't she? Evelyn's voice was sharp. For £200 a month and a connection to a man who could buy her a real position somewhere, instead of playing a state consultant in a house that barely tolerates her. Ask yourself what she actually wants, Adrian. Then ask yourself what you gave her access to. Adrian sat down heavily. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, what do we do? It was the first time he'd said we about the estate in 4 years. Evelyn felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness. She wasn't ready for that. Might never be. But recognition, maybe. The beginning of something different. We fight, she said, but not the way you're used to fighting. No public confrontations, no dramatic gestures. This is precision work. Tell me what you need. Evelyn looked at her husband, really looked at him. He was scared. That much was obvious. But underneath the fear was something else. Not quite respect. Not yet. But maybe the awareness that respect was possible. I need you to do 3 things, she said. First, stay out of my way. Don't countermand my decisions. Don't question my methods. Don't interfere. Can you do that? Adrian nodded slowly. Second, cut Camille off. No more consultation fees, no more estate access, no more conversations about property or contracts or anything remotely connected to Ironvale. If Grayson's using her as a source, we starve the connection. Adrian's jaw tightened, but he nodded again. Third, and this is the hardest one, you're going to have to trust me. Actually trust me. Not performatively, not conditionally. Trust that I know what I'm doing because I've been doing it for 4 years while you weren't looking. Adrian met her eyes. And if I can't, then we lose everything, Evelyn said simply. Grayson will carve up Ironvale piece by piece. The tenants will scatter, the staff will find other positions, and you'll spend the rest of your life explaining how you lost a 400-year-old estate because you were too proud to let your wife save it. The silence stretched. Finally, Adrian said, What do you need me to do first? Evelyn allowed herself a small, grim smile. Tell me everything you told Camille about the river corridor. They worked through lunch, then through tea. By the time the sun started slanting toward evening, the desk was covered in documents, property maps, lease agreements, survey reports, correspondence. Adrian, to his credit, remembered more than Evelyn expected. Dates, figures, conversations. He'd been careless, yes, but not completely oblivious. The information he'd leaked was damaging, but not catastrophic. The water rights survey, he said, pointing to a map. I mentioned it to Camille maybe 2 months ago. She asked about property boundaries, said she was curious about estate geography. I thought she was just making conversation. She wasn't. Evelyn marked the map with red ink. Grayson needed confirmation that the survey was recent. If the rights were based on old documentation, he could challenge them legally, but fresh surveys are harder to dispute. I told her the new survey gave us full access to the northern tributaries, which gives Grayson his attack angle. Evelyn pulled out another document, a dense legal brief. He'll argue historical precedent, claim that the tributary access was granted, not owned, and that the grants are subject to reinterpretation under modern water law. Adrian frowned. Can he do that? He can try. The law's murky enough that a good solicitor could drag it through courts for years. She tapped the brief. Which is why we're not fighting it in court. Then where? In the contracts. Evelyn spread out a series of agreements. Mills, processors, transporters. Every business that uses the river corridor has a contract with us. Those contracts are leverage. If Grayson gets the rights, he still has to honor our existing agreements. And those agreements, she smiled, are very carefully worded. Adrian leaned closer, scanning the text. Exclusive access rights, renewable terms, penalty clauses for disruption. His eyes widened. These would make the corridor almost worthless to him. Exactly. He can buy the land, but he can't use it, not profitably. Not without renegotiating every single contract, which would take years and cost more than the corridor's worth. But if he knows about these contracts, he doesn't. They're recent. I restructured them over the past 18 months, quietly, one at a time. The mills think they're getting better terms, which they are. The transporters think they're getting security, which they are. Nobody realizes they're also building a legal fortress. Adrian sat back, something like awe crossing his face. You planned for this. Before Grayson even made his offer, you were already building defenses. I planned for someone like Grayson, Evelyn corrected. Ironvale is vulnerable to exactly this kind of attack, divide and acquire. So I made us less divisible. She pulled out a final document. But there's still a gap. One contract I haven't locked down. Which one? The grain mill, old Peterson's operation. He's been resistant to new terms, wants to keep things the way his father ran them. I've been negotiating for months, but he's stubborn. And if Grayson approaches him, Peterson might sell, or worse, might agree to looser terms that give Grayson an opening. Either way, it's the weak point in the defense. Adrian stood, paced to the window again. Outside, the estate was settling into dusk. Lights appearing in tenant cottages, smoke rising from chimneys. People who depended on Ironvale staying whole. I know Peterson, he said quietly. My father used to shoot with his father. They had some kind of friendship. That might help, or it might not. Nostalgia doesn't pay bills. Let me try. Adrian turned back, and there was something different in his stance. Less defensive, more present. Let me talk to him. Not as the Duke, not with ultimatums, just as someone who's asking. Evelyn studied him. Why? Because you've been carrying this alone for 4 years, Adrian said. And because if I'm going to learn how to actually manage this estate, I need to start somewhere. Let it be here. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even close to enough. But it was, Evelyn realized, the first honest thing he'd said to her in their entire marriage. All right, she said. But I'm coming with you. Adrian blinked. You don't trust me? I trust you to be sincere. I don't trust you to be strategic. There's a difference. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Fair enough. They rode to Peterson's mill at dawn. The roads were still wet with dew, the air sharp with the smell of early autumn. Evelyn hadn't been on horseback in months. There'd been no time, no reason, and her muscles protested the rhythm. Adrian noticed. We can take the carriage. No, this is better. Less formal. Evelyn adjusted her seat. We're asking for help, not issuing orders. Arriving on horseback makes it a conversation between equals. We're not equals. He's a miller. He's a businessman with leverage we need. That makes him exactly equal. She glanced at Adrian. Remember that. The mill sat on the bend of the river where the current ran fastest. It was old stone and older wood, weathered but solid. Peterson himself was outside, checking the water wheel mechanism. A stocky man with iron-gray hair and hands that had spent decades around grain and grease. He looked up as they approached, surprise flickering across his face. Your Graces, wasn't expecting visitors. We're not visitors, Evelyn said, dismounting. We're neighbors asking a favor. That got his attention. Peterson straightened, wiping his hands on his apron. Favor, is it? May we come in? Adrian asked. Peterson hesitated, then nodded. Aye. Come on, then. The inside of the mill smelled like grain dust and river water. The machinery was quiet, too early for the day's work, but the space hummed with potential energy. Peterson led them to a small office tucked into the back corner. No chairs except one behind the desk. Adrian and Evelyn stood. You've been after me about new contracts, Peterson said without preamble. My answer's still no. My father ran this mill his way, I'll run it mine. Your father, Evelyn said carefully, ran this mill during different times, better times maybe. but also smaller times. Your operation's grown. You process 3 times the volume he did. And I do it fine. You do it well, but fine isn't the same as secure. Evelyn pulled out a folded paper. Malcolm Grayson, property investor from London. He's circling the estate, looking for weak points to buy out. If he gets the river corridor, he'll control access, and he'll renegotiate your terms, upward. Peterson took the paper, scanned it. His expression didn't change. So you want me to sign your contract to protect your estate? No, Adrian said, and both Peterson and Evelyn looked at him. We want you to sign the contract to protect your mill. Because if Grayson gets control, he won't care about your father's legacy or your operation's independence. He'll care about profit margins, and your margins will become his leverage. Peterson's jaw tightened. You're trying to scare me. We're trying to be honest, Evelyn said. The contract I'm offering gives you fixed rates for 5 years, guaranteed access regardless of ownership changes, and profit sharing on efficiency improvements. It's better than what you have now, and it's better than anything Grayson would offer. And if I refuse, then you're vulnerable. We can't force you to sign, but we also can't protect you if you don't. Peterson was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, My father trusted the old Duke. Your father, he nodded at Adrian. They had an understanding. Handshake business, word of honor. My father, Adrian said slowly, died with £73,000 in debt and an estate 6 months from collapse. His handshakes didn't save Ironvale. Her work did. He gestured to Evelyn. Every field you see thriving, every tenant who stayed instead of leaving, every improvement that's happened in the past 4 years, that's her. Not me. Not my father's ghost. Her. Evelyn felt something catch in her throat. Peterson looked between them. You're saying I should trust the Duchess. I'm saying, Adrian said, that you should trust the person who's actually been doing the work. And that's her. The silence that followed felt heavy with decision. Finally, Peterson said, Let me read the contract. Actually read it. I'll give you an answer by week's end. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. That's fair, Evelyn said. Thank you. They rode back in silence. The sun was fully up now, burning off the morning mist. Ironvale spread below them, fields and forests and the river cutting through like a silver vein. That was well done, Evelyn said finally. Adrian glanced at her. You sound surprised. I am. You didn't try to intimidate him, didn't pull rank, didn't make it about title. You made it about truth. Seemed like the right approach. He paused. You've been rebuilding this place with truth for 4 years. Figured I should at least try using it for 5 minutes. It wasn't much. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was, Evelyn thought, possibly the foundation of something different. They rode on. Peterson didn't wait until week's end. He showed up at Ironvale 2 days later, just after noon, his horse lathered and his face grim. Mrs. Halloway intercepted him at the door, but Evelyn heard the commotion from the study and came down herself. He's already been here, Peterson said without preamble. Grayson came to the mill this morning with a surveyor and a solicitor, said he was doing preliminary assessments of the corridor properties. Evelyn's stomach dropped, but her face stayed calm. What did you tell him? Nothing. Told him to get off my property. Peterson pulled a folded document from his coat. But he left this. Said I should review it carefully. Said his offer would be on the table for 72 hours. Evelyn took the paper, unfolded it. The offer was printed on expensive stationery, the terms laid out in precise legal language. Her eyes scanned the numbers. It was triple what the mill was worth. He's not buying your cooperation, she said quietly. He's buying your silence. And your access. Aye. Figured that much. Peterson shifted his weight. Also figured that if he's moving this fast, your contract offer wasn't just about better terms. No, it wasn't. Then I'll sign it. Today, if you've got the papers ready. Evelyn looked at him, really looked. His jaw was set, his hand steady, but there was something else in his eyes, not fear, anger. He threatened you, she said. Didn't have to. The threat was in the numbers. Pay me enough to retire, or watch him squeeze me until I can't afford not to sell. Peterson's voice was flat. My father built that mill with his own hands. Grayson thinks he can buy it out from under me with London money and fancy words. He's wrong. Come inside, Evelyn said. We'll get the contract signed, And then we need to talk about what happens next. Adrian was already in the study when they arrived, surrounded by maps and correspondence. He looked up as they entered, registered Peterson's expression, and went very still. "He's made his move," Adrian said. "Not just his move," Evelyn replied. "His opening gambit. Peterson isn't the only property owner on the corridor. If Grayson's hitting him this hard, he's hitting the others too." She crossed to the desk, pulled out a list. 12 names, 12 properties. Mills, warehouses, transport stations. Every critical point along the river route. "We need to reach all of them before Grayson's offers expire," she said. 72 hours. That's his timeline. "That's impossible," Adrian said. "Half these properties are a day's ride apart. We can't physically visit them all." "Then we don't visit them all. We prioritize." Evelyn's finger moved down the list. "These 4 are already under contract with us, solid terms, recent renewals. They're protected. These 3 are family operations, 3rd generation or older. They won't sell on principle. That leaves 5 vulnerabilities." She circled the names. The Carter Warehouse, the Millbrook Transport Station, the Henderson Grain Storage, the Ashford Weaving House, and the Blackwell Ferry Crossing. Those 5 control the bottlenecks. If Grayson gets 3 out of 5, he can strangle the corridor, even without majority ownership. Peterson leaned over the map. "Blackwell Ferry is a problem. Old Tom Blackwell died last winter. His daughter's running it now, but she's been talking about selling, moving to her sister's place in York." "Then she's the weakest link," Adrian said. "No." Evelyn's voice was sharp. "She's the most desperate link. There's a difference. Desperate people make emotional decisions. We can work with that." She turned to Peterson. "How well do you know her?" "Well enough. Her father and mine were friends. She's good people, just tired. The ferry's hard work, and she's doing it alone. Would she trust you?" "Maybe, if I came with something better than money." Evelyn met his eyes. "What if we offered her a partnership? Keep the ferry, but integrate it into the estate's transport network. Regular contracts, guaranteed income, support staff for the heavy work." Peterson nodded slowly. "That might work. She doesn't want to abandon her father's legacy. She just doesn't want to drown in it." "Then you go to her," Evelyn said. "Today. Make the offer. Emphasize security over profit. If she signs, we've got the Eastern anchor." "And the others?" Adrian asked. Evelyn looked at the remaining 4 names. "Carter's Warehouse is purely business. He'll take the best deal. We need to match Grayson's offer with better terms. Long-term stability versus short-term payout." "That's going to be expensive." "Yes, but cheaper than losing the corridor." She tapped another name. "Millbrook Transport is trickier. The owner's a gambler, always looking for the big score. Grayson's money will appeal to him." "Can we outbid?" "We can't afford to. But we can offer something Grayson can't, exclusivity. Make him the primary transport contractor for all estate goods. It's a steady income stream instead of a one-time payout." Adrian was scribbling notes now, his earlier hesitation replaced by focus. "Henderson Grain Storage? Personal connection. His son works in our stables. I pulled him out of a bad situation last year, gambling debts. Henderson owes me a favor. I'll call it in." "And the Ashford Weaving House?" Evelyn paused. That one was complicated. "Margaret Ashford hates me," she said flatly. Adrian looked up. "What?" "She blames me for her husband's death. He was working on estate repairs 3 years ago when the scaffolding collapsed. It was an accident, faulty equipment, not negligence. But she's convinced I pushed the work too hard, cut corners to save money." "Did you?" "No. But perception matters more than truth." Evelyn's voice was steady, but something flickered in her eyes. "She won't negotiate with me. She might not even negotiate with you, but she might negotiate with someone she respects." "Who?" "Mrs. Halloway. Margaret's known her for 20 years. They were in the same village sewing circle before the accident. If anyone can reach her, it's Mrs. Halloway." Adrian sat back. "So we're splitting up. Peterson to the ferry, you to Henderson and Carter, me to Millbrook, Mrs. Halloway to the Weaving House." "Yes, and we have less than 3 days to lock down all 5 before Grayson's offers close." "And if we fail?" Evelyn's jaw tightened. "Then Grayson gets his foothold, and we lose the corridor piece by piece." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of what failure meant. Not just financial loss. The collapse of everything Evelyn had spent 4 years building. The vindication of every person who dismissed her, ignored her, underestimated her. "Then we don't fail," Adrian said. It should have sounded like bravado. Instead, it sounded like a decision. Peterson left within the hour, riding hard for the Eastern Ferry. Adrian departed shortly after, heading north to the Millbrook station. Evelyn watched them go from the study window, then turned to Mrs. Halloway. "I need you to do something difficult," she said. Mrs. Halloway's expression didn't change. "I've been doing difficult things for this estate for 30 years, Your Grace. What's one more? Margaret Ashford won't listen to me, but she might listen to you. I need you to convince her that signing with us protects her husband's legacy better than selling to Grayson. And if she asks why she should trust anything connected to this estate, tell her the truth, that I've spent 3 years trying to find a way to apologize, and she's never let me close enough to try. That I think about her husband every time I review safety protocols. That I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for her to not let his death be used as leverage by someone who never knew his name." Mrs. Halloway was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded. "I'll need the carriage, and a bottle of the good sherry. Take whatever you need." After Mrs. Halloway left, Evelyn stood alone in the study. The maps on the desk showed the corridor stretched out like a lifeline, every property marked, every connection traced, 4 years of work mapped in ink and paper. She picked up her riding gloves. Henderson first, then Carter. 2 properties, 2 very different conversations, and less than 60 hours to get both signatures. The ride to Henderson's grain storage took 40 minutes. The facility was newer than Peterson's mill, built within the last decade, all modern construction and efficient layout. Henderson himself was outside supervising a delivery, his ledger book tucked under one arm. He saw Evelyn approaching and his expression shifted, surprise, then wariness. "Your Grace, wasn't expecting you." "I won't take much of your time," Evelyn said, dismounting. "I need 5 minutes, alone." Henderson hesitated, then nodded to his workers. "Take your break. Be back in 15. When they were alone, Evelyn said, "Your son is working out well in the stables. Peter says he's reliable, shows initiative. He's grateful for the opportunity. We both are. The gambling debts that would have ruined him, I cleared those, quietly. No interest, no repayment schedule. I did it because he deserved a second chance, and because you deserve not to watch your son destroy himself." Henderson's face tightened. "I know what you did. I know what I owe you." "I'm not here to collect a debt," Evelyn said. "I'm here to offer a choice. Malcolm Grayson has made you an offer for this property, a generous one, enough to retire on maybe, enough to start over somewhere else. He has. If you take it, I won't blame you. It's your property, your decision, but I want you to understand what happens if you sell." She pulled out a map, spread it on the nearest crate. "Grayson doesn't want your facility because he values your work. He wants it because it's positioned here." She tapped the map. "At the intersection of 3 major transport routes. If he controls this point, he controls flow, and he'll use that control to squeeze every other operation on the corridor until they have to sell too." That's business. That's destruction. And your son works for an estate that depends on this corridor. If Grayson carves it up, the estate contracts dry up, the transport work disappears, and your son loses the job that gave him a second chance. Henderson's expression hardened. "That's not a fair argument." "It's not an argument. It's cause and effect." Evelyn folded the map. "I'm offering you a different deal. Keep your facility. Sign a 10-year contract with guaranteed minimums and revenue sharing on surplus storage. Your operation stays independent, but you're protected from market manipulation, and your son keeps his future. And if I refuse both, keep my property but don't sign your contract, then you're vulnerable. Grayson will wait you out, undercut your rates, strangle your access. Within 2 years you'll sell anyway, but for a fraction of what he's offering now." Henderson was quiet. His hands were steady on his ledger, but his jaw worked like he was chewing on something bitter. "You're asking me to choose between immediate security and long-term survival," he said finally. "I'm asking you to choose whether you trust a stranger with a big check or a neighbor who's proven she keeps her promises." The silence stretched. Evelyn didn't push. This was the moment where desperation could tip either way, toward the quick escape or the harder path. Finally, Henderson said, "Show me the contract." 20 minutes later, Evelyn had his signature. The relief should have felt bigger, but there wasn't time to celebrate. She had Carter next, and Carter was going to be harder. The Carter warehouse sat on the western edge of the corridor, a sprawling complex of storage buildings and loading docks. James Carter ran it like a military operation, efficient, profitable, utterly pragmatic. He didn't care about legacy or loyalty. He cared about numbers. Evelyn found him in his office, reviewing shipping manifests. He looked up when she entered, unsurprised. "Duchess, I was wondering when you'd arrive." "You've seen Grayson's offer." "I have. It's impressive." Carter set down his pen. "But I'm guessing you're here to make a counteroffer." "Not a counteroffer, a better offer. Grayson's paying 40% above market value. You can't match that without bankrupting yourself. I'm not trying to match his payout. I'm offering you something worth more, certainty." Evelyn pulled out a contract. "Grayson's buying your property. What happens to your operation after the sale? Where do you relocate? How do you rebuild client relationships? How long before you're profitable again?" Carter's eyes narrowed. "He's offered relocation assistance. A stipend, enough to rent space somewhere else, maybe hire back half your staff. You'd be starting over at 53 years old in a market you don't control." She slid the contract across his desk. "I'm offering you a different option. Sell me a 20% stake in your operation. I pay you fair market value for that stake. You keep majority ownership and full operational control. In exchange, you become the primary warehousing contractor for all estate goods. Guaranteed volume, fixed rates, 20-year term." Carter picked up the contract, scanning the numbers. "This is less money up front. It's less risk long term. You keep your operation, expand your capacity, and lock in the largest client in the region. Grayson gives you retirement money. I'm giving you growth capital. And if the estate fails, if Grayson wins anyway, then the contract has a dissolution clause with full reimbursement. You're protected either way." Carter read for a long time. Evelyn watched him calculate, weighing risk against reward, certainty against speculation. He was a businessman, first, last, and always. The question was whether his business sense favored the quick profit or the stable foundation. "I need 48 hours to review this with my solicitor," he said finally. Evelyn's heart sank. 48 hours put them right at Grayson's deadline, maybe past it. "I need an answer in 24, she said. "That's not enough time for proper due diligence. It's enough time to decide whether you trust the numbers I'm showing you." Evelyn leaned forward. "Grayson's offer expires in 60 hours. If you wait 48 to give me an answer and it's no, I don't have time to find an alternative. And if you wait 48 to give him an answer, he'll know you were negotiating with me and he might withdraw entirely. 24 hours protects both of us." Carter's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Respect, maybe, or just recognition of a well-played move. 24 hours, he agreed. "But I want financial documentation. Proof the estate can support this contract long-term." "You'll have it by tonight." Evelyn rode back to Ironvale with one signature secured and one promise extracted. It wasn't enough, but it was progress. She found Adrian in the study, returned from Millbrook, his face a mask of frustration. "He laughed at me," Adrian said without preamble. "The Millbrook owner. I offered him the exclusivity contract, guaranteed income, everything you said. He laughed and told me Grayson's paying him enough to buy 3 transport operations. Said I was wasting his time." Evelyn felt something cold settle in her chest. "Did you get the sense he'd already decided?" "I got the sense he thinks we're desperate and he's holding the winning hand." Adrian threw himself into a chair. "We've lost Millbrook." "Not yet." Evelyn crossed to the desk, pulled out a different set of documents. "Millbrook has a reputation problem. 3 complaints filed with the Regional Transport Authority in the past 2 years. Late deliveries, damaged goods, contract violations. Nothing serious enough to shut him down, but enough to make larger clients nervous." "How do you know that?" "Because I filed one of the complaints, anonymously, when he shorted us on a grain delivery and tried to charge us for the full amount." She spread the documents out. "If Grayson's buying him out, Grayson's also buying his liabilities. And Grayson's the kind of investor who does deep due diligence." Adrian stared at her. "You're going to sabotage the sale." "I'm going to inform Grayson's people about the risks they're taking, anonymously, Let them decide if Millbrook's worth the price. That's, Adrian stopped. That's brilliant and ruthless. It's necessary. If we can't win Millbrook's cooperation, we make him less valuable to Grayson. Force Grayson to reconsider whether that property is worth the investment. And if Grayson doesn't care, then we've lost one property out of 5, but we've made him pay more for it than it's worth. Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "When did you become this person?" Evelyn looked at him. "When I had to." Mrs. Halloway returned just before sunset, her face drawn but not defeated. She found Evelyn in the kitchens, reviewing the financial documentation Carter had requested. "She'll sign," Mrs. Halloway said. Evelyn's hands stilled. "Margaret? Took 2 hours and most of the sherry, but yes, she'll sign." Mrs. Halloway pulled out a chair, sat heavily. "She's not doing it for you. She's doing it because her husband spent 15 years building that weaving house, and she'll be damned if some London investor turns it into a speculation property." "Did she?" Evelyn's voice caught. "Did she say anything about—" "She said she's not ready to forgive you, maybe won't ever be, but she's tired of being angry, and she's more tired of being used as a weapon." Mrs. Halloway's eyes were kind. "She knows Grayson's people approached her because they think she hates you enough to sell just to spite the estate. She won't give them that satisfaction." Evelyn sat down slowly. For 4 years, she'd carried the weight of Margaret's husband's death like a stone in her chest. The relief of Margaret's signature should have felt like that stone being lifted. Instead, it felt like being allowed to finally acknowledge it was there. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Don't thank me yet. We've still got Carter wavering and Millbrook slipping away. 3 out of 5 isn't enough if Grayson's smart about which 3 he targets." Evelyn nodded. "Then we make sure he's not smart about it. We make him react instead of plan." She pulled out paper, started writing. A letter, unsigned, addressed to Grayson's London office. "What are you doing?" Mrs. Halloway asked. "Feeding him information. About Millbrook's liabilities, about Carter's financial instability, about how the ferry crossing's equipment is outdated and dangerous." Evelyn kept writing. "All of it true. All of it slanted to make our most vulnerable properties look like bad investments. You're trying to steer him toward the ones you've already locked down. I'm trying to make him doubt his own intelligence. Make him think his inside information is incomplete. If he starts second-guessing, he'll slow down. And slow is what we need." She sealed the letter, addressed it. "This goes to London tonight. Anonymous delivery." Mrs. Halloway took the letter, her expression unreadable. "You're playing a dangerous game. I've been playing it for 4 years. I'm just playing it louder now." That night, Evelyn barely slept. She kept running scenarios, calculating probabilities, trying to see the moves ahead. Carter's answer would come tomorrow. Peterson should have reached the ferry by now. Millbrook was probably lost, but 3 solid contracts out of 5 gave them control of the critical nodes, barely enough to keep the corridor functional even if Grayson bought the other 2. Unless Grayson realized that and shifted his strategy. The thought made her stomach turn. At dawn, a rider arrived. Not from Carter, from Peterson. The ferry crossing was secured. The daughter had signed. Evelyn felt the first real breath of relief in days. Then, at noon, Carter's solicitor arrived with his answer. He'd sign, but with modifications, a shorter initial term with renewal options, and quarterly audits of the estate's financials to ensure contract sustainability. It was more restrictive than Evelyn wanted, but it was a yes. 4 out of 5. Adrian found her in the study an hour later, staring at the map. Millbrook was still unmarked, the one gap in their defense. "We've got most of them," he said. "Most isn't all. But it's enough. Grayson can buy Millbrook, but without the other properties, he can't control the corridor. He'd just own an expensive isolated transport station. Unless he's been playing us the whole time, unless Millbrook was always a feint, and he's got something else planned." Adrian crossed to the window, looked out at the estate grounds. "You can't protect against every possibility." "I can try." "You'll exhaust yourself trying." He turned back. "Evelyn, you've done something in 3 days that should have taken 3 weeks. You've outmaneuvered a professional investor with more resources and more experience. You've held the line. That's victory. Victory is keeping Ironvale whole. Victory is keeping Ironvale alive. Whole is a luxury we might not afford." Evelyn looked at him, this man she'd married and barely known, who'd spent 4 years oblivious and was now standing in her study talking about strategy and compromise like he'd finally woken up to what marriage actually meant. "I'm not settling for survival," she said. "Not after 4 years of building this." "Then what's the plan?" Evelyn turned back to the map. Millbrook sat there like a target, unmarked and vulnerable. "We go to London," she said. "We find Grayson, and we make him an offer he can't calculate his way around." Adrian's eyes widened. "You want to negotiate directly?" "I want to end this before he finds another angle. We've got 4 properties locked down. We've got documentation proving the corridor's viability requires majority cooperation, which he doesn't have. We've got leverage. We use it. He'll never see you. You're a woman? A duchess from a minor estate? Someone he's already dismissed?" Evelyn's smile was sharp. "Yes, that's exactly why he'll see me. Because he'll want to watch me beg. And when you don't beg? Then we find out if Malcolm Grayson is actually as smart as his reputation claims." The decision hung in the air between them, reckless, dangerous, and possibly the only move Grayson wouldn't anticipate. "When do we leave?" Adrian asked. Evelyn pulled out her pocket watch. "Tomorrow morning. First train to London." "That's insane. We don't even know where his office is, what his schedule." "I know exactly where his office is. I've known for 2 months. I also know he takes meetings on Friday afternoons, that he prefers negotiating in person, and that his solicitor is the same man who handled the Westmore estate acquisition 3 years ago." She met Adrian's eyes. "I've been preparing for this conversation since the first time I heard his name. I just didn't know it would happen this soon." Adrian stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed, a short, sharp sound that held equal parts disbelief and admiration. "You're terrifying," he said. "I'm thorough." Evelyn started gathering documents. "Pack for 2 nights. Bring formal clothes." "And Adrian?" "Yes?" "Don't tell anyone where we're going, not the staff, not Peters, not Mrs. Halloway. If Grayson has sources here, I want him to think we're panicking and scattered, not planning and focused." "Understood." After he left, Evelyn stood alone in the study one more time. Outside, Ironvale spread in all its careful beauty, her work, her design, her 4 years of invisible labor made visible. She'd spent those years in the shadows, building in secret, protecting from behind curtains and closed doors. Tomorrow, she'd step into the light and face the man trying to tear it all down. She picked up the travel documents, checked the train schedule one more time. Then she locked the study door and went to pack. The train to London left at 6 in the morning, when the platform was still shrouded in fog, and the only other passengers were businessmen with newspapers and tired mothers herding children. Evelyn wore traveling clothes that cost less than Camille's breakfast. Deliberate choice. She needed to look competent, not wealthy. Capable, not desperate. Adrian sat across from her in the compartment, watching the countryside blur past. He'd barely spoken since they'd boarded. "You're nervous," Evelyn said. "I'm trying to figure out what you're going to say to him." Adrian shifted his gaze to her. "You've got a plan. You always have a plan. But this feels different." "Because it is different. Everything until now has been defense, protecting what we have, securing our position. This is offense. And if he doesn't negotiate? Then we learn what kind of man Malcolm Grayson actually is, whether he's a businessman or just a gambler with better suits." The train rattled over a bridge. Below, a river cut through farmland. Somebody else's corridor. Somebody else's lifeline. Evelyn wondered if they were fighting the same fight somewhere, or if they'd already lost. "What did you pack?" Adrian asked suddenly. Evelyn blinked. "What?" "In your case, what did you bring?" "Contracts, financial records, property documentation, a change of clothes." She frowned. "Why?" "Just trying to understand how your mind works. Most people packing for a confrontation would bring leverage, threats, insurance. You brought paperwork." "Paperwork is leverage. The rest is just theater." Adrian smiled slightly. "You're going to terrify him." "I'm going to give him facts. If that terrifies him, he's in the wrong business." They arrived at King's Cross just after 9. London hit like a wall. Noise, crowds, the smell of coal smoke and horse manure, and too many people pressed into too little space. Evelyn hadn't been to the city in 6 years. It hadn't gotten quieter. She led Adrian through the station with the efficiency of someone who'd memorized maps she'd never walked. Left at the main hall, through the west exit, into the cab queue. She gave the driver an address in Cheapside, not Grayson's office. That would come later. "Where are we going?" Adrian asked as the cab lurched into traffic. "Somewhere he won't expect us to go first." The cab stopped outside a narrow building wedged between a tailor and a bookshop. The sign above the door read, "Whitmore and Associates, Legal Services." Adrian stared. The Whitmore Consortium. The family firm. Before they got into timber processing, they were solicitors. Still are, technically, though they don't advertise it. Evelyn paid the driver. They also happen to hate Malcolm Grayson. How do you know that? Because Grayson dismantled their northern operations 2 years ago. Bought out their contracts, poached their clients, left them with nothing but the legal practice and a grudge. She stepped onto the curb. "I've been corresponding with Thomas Whitmore for 8 months. He's been very helpful." Inside, the office smelled like old paper and furniture polish. A clerk looked up from his desk, registered Evelyn's appearance, and immediately stood straighter. "Duchess Carrington, Mr. Whitmore is expecting you." They were led upstairs to a cramped office where Thomas Whitmore sat behind a desk buried in documents. He was younger than Evelyn expected, maybe 40, with prematurely gray hair and the kind of sharp eyes that came from reading contracts until they bled. "Your Grace." He stood, extended a hand. "And this is my husband, the Duke." Whitmore's handshake was firm. "I wasn't expecting both of you. Plans change." Evelyn sat without waiting for an invitation. Adrian followed suit. "I need to know what Grayson's actual leverage is, not what he's claiming, what he actually has. You said you had documentation." Whitmore pulled a folder from a drawer. "Malcolm Grayson operates through shell companies, 12 of them, last count. He keeps his personal assets separate from his acquisition ventures, which means if a deal goes bad, he walks away clean. But it also means his capital is limited. He can't fund multiple large acquisitions simultaneously without over-leveraging. How over-leveraged is he now? 3 major purchases in the past 6 months. The Kensington textile mill, the Portsmouth shipping contracts, and a railway spur in Devon. Total outlay around £200,000. Whitmore opened the folder. He's financed most of it through short-term loans with balloon payments due in 8 months. Evelyn felt something click into place. He needs the river corridor to flip quickly. Buy cheap, sell high, pay off the loans before they come due. Exactly. If he can't complete the acquisition and resale within his timeline, he's exposed. His creditors aren't patient people. Who are his creditors? Consortium of private investors, London-based mostly, a few from Edinburgh. They expect returns, not excuses. Whitmore slid a paper across the desk. "I took the liberty of identifying the 3 most influential. If you could convince even one of them that the corridor investment is risky, Grayson's financing could collapse." Adrian leaned forward. "You're suggesting we go around him, undermine his funding before he can complete the purchase." "I'm suggesting you give him a reason to negotiate instead of steamroll. Right now he thinks he's holding all the cards. Show him his hand isn't as strong as he believes." Evelyn studied the list of names. She recognized 2 of them, minor aristocracy with investment portfolios, the kind of men who attended the same club functions as Adrian's father had. Reachable, maybe, if she played it right. "This is good," she said, "but it's not enough. Even if we spook his investors, he could still buy Millbrook outright and use it to strangle the corridor long term. We need to remove that option entirely." "How?" Evelyn looked at Adrian. "We buy Millbrook ourselves." The silence that followed was deafening. "With what money?" Adrian finally said. "We don't have liquid capital for that kind of purchase. We do if we leverage the estate, borrow against the land value, use the loan to outbid Grayson, then pay it back with corridor revenues once the network's secure." "That's insane. If anything goes wrong, we lose everything." "We lose everything if Grayson wins anyway. This way, we control the outcome." Whitmore was watching her with something like fascination. "That's a dangerous gamble. It's a calculated risk. And I've been calculating for 4 years." Evelyn stood. "Can you draft the loan papers, something we can present to a lender this afternoon?" "This afternoon? That's impossible." "Nothing's impossible. It's just expensive." She pulled out a promissory note. This is good for your retainer and the rush fee. Get it done. Whitmore looked at the note, then at Evelyn, then at Adrian. You're serious? Completely. Then I'll need 2 hours. Maybe 3. You have 90 minutes. We're meeting Grayson at 2. Outside, Adrian grabbed her arm. Evelyn, stop. Just stop for 1 second and think about what you're doing. I have thought about it. I've thought about nothing else for 3 days. You're betting the entire estate on a single move. I'm betting the estate on the work I've already done. The contracts are solid, the properties are locked down, the revenue streams are proven. This isn't reckless. This is finishing what I started. Adrian's grip tightened. And if you're wrong? Evelyn met his eyes. For the first time since the breakfast table confrontation, she let him see past the calculations, past the strategy. Let him see the fear underneath. Then I lose everything I spent 4 years building, she said quietly. And I prove right every person who ever thought a woman couldn't run an estate. Every person who dismissed me, ignored me, assumed I was decorative. I prove them all right. That's not... Yes, it is. That's exactly what it is. Her voice was steady, but barely. I've been invisible my entire marriage. I made myself invisible because it was safer, easier, the only way to survive. But I can't be invisible anymore. Not if I want to save this. Adrian's hand loosened. His expression did something complicated. Pain, recognition, maybe the beginning of understanding. Then let me help, he said. Actually, help. Not just follow your lead or sign papers or pretend I know what I'm doing. Tell me what you need. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, I need you to go to your club. Find the investors on Whitmore's list. Use your connections, your name, your father's reputation, whatever opens doors. Plant doubt about Grayson's timeline. Make them nervous. And you? I'm going to meet with a lender. Get the loan papers signed. Then we both go to Grayson's office and see if he's smart enough to fold. Adrian nodded slowly. What if he calls our bluff? Then we find out if I'm as good at this as I think I am. They separated at the corner of Threadneedle Street. Adrian headed toward St. James's, where the gentlemen's clubs clustered like expensive barnacles. Evelyn walked 3 blocks south to a private bank that catered to landed gentry with cash flow problems. The bank manager was a man named Pritchard, 50s, impeccably dressed, with the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. He listened to Evelyn's proposal with the expression of someone being offered swampland. You want to borrow £40,000, he said flatly, against an estate that, according to public records, was nearly bankrupt 4 years ago. According to public records, yes. According to actual financial performance, the estate has increased revenues by 68% in that time and reduced operating costs by 32%. The debt load has been restructured and is ahead of schedule on repayment. Evelyn slid a ledger across his desk. These are the real numbers. Pritchard opened the ledger. His expression didn't change, but his eyes moved faster. These are extensive. They're complete. Every transaction, every contract, every revenue stream for the past 4 years, documented and verified. And you're claiming you managed all of this personally? I'm not claiming. I'm stating. Evelyn kept her voice level. The estate was collapsing when I married into it. I rebuilt it, quietly, efficiently, and without public acknowledgement. Now I need capital to protect what I've built. Pritchard leaned back in his chair. Why the urgency? If the estate is as healthy as you claim, why risk a large loan on a rushed acquisition? Because a competitor is trying to dismantle the infrastructure that makes the estate viable. If he succeeds, all the improvements I've made become worthless. The loan protects the investment, or doubles your exposure. Only if I fail. I don't intend to fail. Pritchard studied her. You understand that if you default, the bank takes the estate. All of it. Your husband's ancestral lands, your home, everything. I understand. And he's agreed to this? He will. Evelyn kept her gaze steady. The documents will be signed by both of us, but the decision is mine. That's irregular. So is a duchess managing an estate for 4 years without anyone noticing? Irregular seems to be my specialty. Something shifted in Pritchard's expression. Not quite approval. Bankers didn't do approval. But interest. The kind of interest that came from recognizing a calculated risk that might actually pay off. I'll need collateral beyond the land, he said. Personal guarantees, secondary assets, something liquid. The estate has livestock, equipment, stored grain worth approximately 12,000 pounds at current market rates. I can provide itemized lists. That's still short of standard coverage. Evelyn reached into her bag, pulled out a small velvet case. Inside were her mother's pearls, the only thing of real value she'd brought into the marriage. Worth maybe 3,000 pounds if she sold them. Worth everything if she didn't. These cover the gap, she said, setting the case on the desk. Pritchard opened it, examined the pearls with a jeweler's eye. These are personal items. They're collateral. If I default, you sell them. If I don't, I get them back. He closed the case carefully. You're willing to risk your inheritance on this. I'm willing to risk everything on this. Because if I don't, I lose it anyway. Pritchard was quiet for what felt like an eternity. Then he pulled out a contract form and started writing. 40,000 pounds at 8% interest, 18-month term with quarterly payments. If you miss a single payment, the full amount becomes due immediately, and we begin foreclosure proceedings. The pearls remain in our vault until the loan is satisfied. Agreed. I'll need both signatures, yours and your husband's, and I'll need them today. You'll have them within 3 hours. Pritchard looked at her like she'd just promised to deliver the moon. You're either very brave or very foolish, Your Grace. I'm very desperate, Evelyn said, but I'm also very thorough. There's a difference. She left the bank with unsigned loan documents and 90 minutes before the meeting with Grayson. Her hands were shaking, delayed reaction to the enormity of what she'd just committed to. 40,000 pounds. Her mother's pearls. The entire estate on a single bet. She found a tea shop, ordered something she didn't drink, and sat with the loan papers until her hands stopped shaking. At 1:30, she met Adrian outside Grayson's office building. He looked pale but determined. Did you reach the investors? She asked. 2 of them. One was sympathetic, old friend of my father's, doesn't trust Grayson anyway. The other was non-committal but nervous. I think I planted enough doubt. Good. Evelyn handed him the loan documents. Sign these. Adrian scanned the papers. His face went white. Evelyn, this is everything. I know. Sign them anyway. If we fail, we won't. You can't guarantee that. Sign the papers, Adrian. Her voice was sharp enough to cut. We're out of time and out of options. Either you trust me or you don't, but decide now. Adrian stared at her. Then he pulled out a pen and signed. Evelyn countersigned, folded the documents, tucked them into her bag. Whitmore's meeting us here with the Millbrook purchase offer. Once Grayson sees we're serious about buying the property ourselves, he'll have to reconsider his position. Or he'll call our bluff, and we'll be committed to a loan we can't afford. Then we'd better make sure he doesn't call it. Grayson's office was on the 4th floor of a building that smelled like expensive tobacco and old money. The receptionist was a young man with slicked hair and a smile that suggested he'd been hired for decoration, not competence. The Duke and Duchess of Ironvale, Evelyn said. We have a meeting with Mr. Grayson. The receptionist checked a ledger. I don't see an appointment. Then make one. Tell Mr. Grayson we're here to discuss his river corridor acquisition. Tell him we have a counterproposal. Tell him he has 5 minutes to see us, or we walk and he loses his window. The receptionist's smile faltered. I'll check with Mr. Grayson. He disappeared through a door. Evelyn and Adrian waited. 30 seconds, 60, 90. The door opened. The receptionist looked flustered. Mr. Grayson will see you now. Malcolm Grayson's office was everything Evelyn expected. Dark wood, leather furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Thames. Grayson himself stood by the window, backlit by afternoon sun. He was younger than his reputation suggested, maybe 45, well-dressed, but not ostentatious, with the kind of face that revealed nothing. Duchess Carrington. His voice was smooth, cultured, completely unreadable. And Duke Hale. This is unexpected. We're here to save you from a bad investment, Evelyn said. Grayson's eyebrow lifted fractionally. I wasn't aware I was making one. The river corridor. You've been acquiring properties, making offers, building leverage, but your intelligence is incomplete. Evelyn crossed to his desk, set down a folder. 4 of the 5 critical properties are under exclusive long-term contracts with our estate. The contracts are ironclad, verified by 3 independent solicitors. You can buy the land, but you can't use it profitably. Not for years. Grayson opened the folder, scanned the documents. His expression didn't change. Interesting, he said. But incomplete is a strong word. I'm aware of your contracts, Duchess. I'm also aware they're vulnerable to legal challenge under the new commercial access provisions Parliament passed last spring. Evelyn felt ice in her stomach. Those provisions apply to public waterways. The river corridor is private. Portions of it are. Other portions have historical public access rights that were never formally revoked. I have surveyors and legal historians who've documented at least 3 points where your claims are questionable. He closed the folder. I don't need to control the entire corridor. I just need to create enough doubt that your contractors won't renew when their terms expire. Then I wait, and buy the pieces when they're cheaper. That's a long game, Adrian said. Expensive, uncertain. I specialize in long games. Grayson's smile was thin. But I appreciate you coming here. It confirms you're worried, which means my strategy is working. Evelyn forced her breathing to stay even. He'd anticipated the contract defense, which meant he'd been planning this longer than she'd realized. There's a 5th property, she said. Millbrook Transport. You've made an offer. So have we. Ours is higher. How much higher? Enough. Grayson studied her. You're bluffing. You don't have the capital for a bidding war. Don't I? Evelyn pulled out the loan documents, unsigned copies, the signatures hidden. £40,000 secured against the estate. More than enough to outbid you for Millbrook and buy out any other property you're targeting. You wanted a negotiation. Here it is. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Grayson laughed. It wasn't a cruel sound, just genuinely amused. You're mortgaging your entire estate to buy a single transport station, he said. That's either brilliant or suicidal. I haven't decided which. It's neither. It's strategic. Millbrook is your access point. Without it, your legal challenges don't matter because you can't physically move goods through the corridor even if you win the rights. We control the choke point. And if I outbid your $40,000, then you overpay for a property that's worth half that and prove you're operating on ego instead of economics. Your investors won't appreciate that. Grayson's amusement faded. You've been talking to my investors. My husband has. Apparently they're less confident in your timeline than you'd like them to be. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Grayson's expression was no longer neutral. It was calculating, measuring, reassessing. This is a dangerous game you're playing, Duchess. I've been playing it for 4 years. You're just now noticing. Grayson walked to his desk, pulled out a different folder. Let me show you something. He opened it, revealing documents Evelyn didn't recognize. Your tenant leases, the ones you're so proud of. They're built on an assumption that the Agricultural Reform Act won't apply to estates under 5,000 acres, but Ironvale is 4,800 acres. If Parliament expands the threshold, and they're debating it right now, your entire lease structure becomes invalid. Your tenants could walk, your revenue base collapses, and that loan you just took out becomes an anchor that drowns you. Evelyn's chest tightened. She'd known the Reform Act was being debated. She hadn't known it was close to expansion. You're betting on legislation that might not pass, she said. I'm betting on uncertainty, which is something you can't afford. Grayson closed the folder. Here's my counterproposal. Sell me a controlling interest in the corridor operations. Not the land, you keep that. But give me management authority over transport, processing, commercial access. I'll pay fair market value, you'll retain ownership, and we'll split revenues 60-40 in your favor. That's absurd, Adrian said. You're asking us to hand you control? I'm offering you a way out of a fight you can't win. The Duchess has done impressive work rebuilding your estate. But she's overextended. One bad harvest, one legislative change, one contractor default, and the whole structure collapses. My offer gives you stability. Evelyn looked at the papers on his desk. The Reform Act debate, the legal challenges, the timeline pressure. He'd built a web of vulnerabilities she'd either missed or underestimated. No, she said. Grayson blinked. I'm sorry? No, I'm not selling you control. Not of the corridor, not of the operations, not of anything. Evelyn picked up her folder. You've done your research, you've found the weak points, but you've also made an assumption that's going to cost you. Which is? That I'm acting out of desperation instead of strength. That I'm overextended instead of positioned. That I'll break under pressure instead of pushing back. She met his eyes. You're wrong on all three counts. The loan is secured, the Millbrook bid is ready, and if you want to drag this into a legal fight over public access rights and Reform Act thresholds, I'll see you in court. And I'll win. Because I've spent 4 years documenting every transaction, every contract, every legal basis for every decision I've made. My paperwork is better than yours, and my motivation is stronger. Grayson's jaw tightened. You're making a mistake. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. She turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. Your shell companies? The 12 you used to spread risk? I've identified 11 of them. By tomorrow, I'll have the 12th. And then I'll know exactly how overleveraged you actually are. If you want to negotiate seriously, you know where to find me, but come with honesty, not threats. She walked out. Adrian followed. They made it to the street before Adrian grabbed her arm. Did we just declare war on Malcolm Grayson? No, we just showed him we're not afraid of one. Evelyn's hands were shaking again, but her voice was steady. Now we deliver the loan papers to Pritchard, finalize the Millbrook bid, and pray I didn't just destroy everything. They were halfway to the bank when a messenger boy caught up to them. Message for the Duchess of Ironvale. Evelyn took the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Grayson's handwriting. My office, tomorrow, 9 o'clock. Come alone. We'll talk numbers. Adrian read over her shoulder. That's not a surrender. No, but it's not an attack either. Evelyn folded the paper carefully. It's an opening, which means he's worried. Or setting a trap, possibly. She looked at the note again. But if he wanted to crush us, he'd do it publicly, legally, with maximum damage. Private meeting means he's considering alternatives. Or planning something worse. Evelyn didn't answer. Because Adrian was right. This could be a trap. But it could also be the only chance to end this without losing everything. The bank accepted the signed loan papers. The £40,000 was deposited into the estate account. Evelyn's mother's pearls went into the vault. Whitmore had the Millbrook purchase offer ready by 5 o'clock. Evelyn signed it. Adrian signed it. It was delivered to Millbrook's owner by courier within the hour. That night, they stayed in a modest hotel near Covent Garden. Adrian paced the room while Evelyn reviewed documents. You're actually going alone tomorrow, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes. That's insane. He could what? Physically threaten me in his own office? Kill me and dispose of the body in broad daylight? Evelyn set down her papers. He's a businessman, not a villain from a penny dreadful. The worst he can do is make a better offer than I can refuse, or a worse threat than I can withstand. Either way, I need to hear it. Let me come with you. No. He asked for me alone. If I bring you, it signals I'm afraid, or that I don't trust my own judgment. Neither helps our position. Adrian stopped pacing. What if you don't come back? Then you take the loan papers, the contracts, and everything I've built, and you finish it. You've learned enough in the past week. You could do it. I don't want to do it. I want you to come back. Evelyn looked at him. There was something raw in his expression. Not love, they weren't there yet, maybe never would be. But concern. Actual genuine concern for her safety, her well-being, her life beyond what she could provide the estate. I'll come back, she said quietly. I've survived 4 years of invisibility. I can survive one meeting with Malcolm Grayson. She didn't sleep that night. Just lay in the dark, calculating, planning, running scenarios until the numbers blurred into anxiety and the anxiety crystallized into determination. At 8:30 the next morning, she stood outside Grayson's building, alone. The loan papers in her bag felt like both weapon and anchor. She climbed to the 4th floor. The receptionist recognized her this time, didn't bother with pleasantries, just opened the door. Grayson was at his desk, reading something. He looked up as she entered. Duchess, punctual. I appreciate that. You asked for this meeting. I'm here. Talk. Grayson gestured to a chair. Evelyn didn't sit. I've reconsidered my position, he said. Your loan changes the equation, not dramatically, but enough. If you're willing to bet £40,000 on Millbrook, you're either more desperate or more confident than I calculated. I'm betting on confident. Good bet, which means the corridor is more valuable than my initial assessment. You've built something functional, maybe even profitable. That's rare. He pulled out a new document. So here's my revised offer. I withdraw all property bids. You keep your corridor intact. In exchange, I get first right of refusal on any future sales or expansion beyond the current network. If you grow, I get the opportunity to invest at fair terms. Evelyn stared at the paper. It was reasonable, almost generous, which meant it was a trap. "What's the catch?" she asked. "No catch. I'm a businessman, not a conqueror. If the corridor is as solid as you claim, attacking it is expensive and uncertain. Partnering with it is cheaper and safer. You don't partner, you acquire. I acquire when acquisition makes sense. Right now, it doesn't. You've locked down the properties, secured the financing, built legal defenses I'd spend months untangling. That's time and money I could invest elsewhere." He pushed the document toward her. "This is me cutting my losses and repositioning." Evelyn picked up the paper. "Read it carefully. The terms were clean, no hidden clauses, no poison pills. If Iron Veil expanded beyond the current corridor, which she had no plans to do, Grayson got first chance to invest. Otherwise, he walked away. It was too good." "Why?" she said. "Because I did more research after you left yesterday. The Reform Act expansion isn't passing. The votes aren't there, which means your lease structure is safe, which means your revenue base is stable, which means you're not as vulnerable as I thought." He leaned back. "I could keep fighting, but I'd be fighting strength, not weakness. That's bad business. So you're just giving up." "I'm repositioning," Grayson corrected. "There's a difference. You've won this round, Duchess. Congratulations. But the war isn't over. Estates rise and fall. You might stumble. When you do, I'll be there with an offer. Until then," he gestured to the document, "this keeps the door open without costing either of us more blood." Evelyn looked at the paper, at Grayson, at the office with its expensive furniture and Thames view. Then she tore the document in half. Grayson's expression finally cracked. "What are you doing?" "Refusing." Evelyn dropped the pieces on his desk. "Because you're lying. Not about the Reform Act. I believe that. But about giving up. You don't give up, you regroup. And this," she gestured to the torn paper, "is you trying to keep a hook in Iron Veil so you can pull later. That's paranoid. That's experience. First right of refusal sounds harmless until I actually need to expand and you leverage it into control. Or until you use it as a bargaining chip with someone else. Or until it becomes a legal complication that prevents me from making decisions freely." She met his eyes. "I didn't spend 4 years building Iron Veil just to give you veto power over its future." Grayson stood slowly. "Then what do you want?" "I want you gone. Completely. No rights, no options, no ties. Withdraw your bids, cancel your surveys, stop circling. In exchange, I won't expose your shell company structure to your investors or document how over-leveraged you actually are. That's extortion. That's negotiation, and it's the only offer you're getting." Evelyn picked up her bag. "You have until Monday to respond. After that, I start making calls to Edinburgh." She turned to leave. "You're making a powerful enemy," Grayson said quietly. Evelyn looked back. "No, I'm refusing to make a dangerous ally. There's a difference." She walked out, made it to the street, made it around the corner, then she leaned against a wall and let herself shake. She'd just burned the compromise, rejected the easy path, turned a negotiation into a standoff. And she had no idea if it would work. The train lurched forward, and Evelyn watched the estate disappear behind a curtain of morning fog. She hadn't slept. Every time she'd closed her eyes, she'd seen the map. The corridor stretched out like a vein, Millbrook sitting there like a clot waiting to kill the whole system. Adrian sat across from her in the private compartment, pretending to read a newspaper. He'd folded and refolded the same page 3 times in the last 10 minutes. "You're nervous," Evelyn said. "I'm aware we're walking into a lion's den with nothing but a stack of contracts and audacity. The contracts are good, and audacity's gotten me further than courtesy ever did." Adrian set down the paper. "What if he doesn't take the meeting?" "He'll take it. Men like Grayson can't resist the opportunity to say no in person. It's half the pleasure." She pulled out a leather portfolio, checked the documents inside for the 4th time. Everything was there: property contracts, financial records, the legal analysis she'd commissioned on corridor operations. "Besides, he thinks we're desperate. Desperate people make mistakes. He'll want to watch me make mine. And when you don't, then we see if he's actually a businessman or just a bully with money. The train rattled through the countryside, smoke and steam cutting past the windows in gray streaks. Evelyn watched the landscape change from rolling fields to industrial towns, chimneys sprouting like weeds, the world getting denser and louder as they approached London. She'd only been to the city twice since her marriage, both times with Adrian for social obligations she'd hated and he'd barely noticed her at. She remembered feeling invisible even in crowds, a title with no voice, a duchess who nobody bothered addressing directly. That woman felt like someone else now. They arrived at King's Cross just after noon. The station was chaos. Travelers shouting, porters hauling luggage, the smell of coal smoke and human sweat thick enough to taste. Adrian hired a cab while Evelyn stood on the platform, gripping her portfolio like a shield. Grayson's office was in Mayfair, tucked into a building that screamed old money trying to look modern. Glass and marble facade, brass fixtures polished to mirrors, a doorman who looked at their travel-worn clothes with barely concealed disdain. "We're here to see Malcolm Grayson," Adrian said, his Duke voice sliding back into place like armor. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, tell him the Duke and Duchess of Ironvale would like a word about the River Corridor acquisitions." The doorman's expression flickered. Surprise? Calculation. Something that might have been respect. "Wait here." He disappeared inside. Evelyn and Adrian stood in the lobby surrounded by marble and money, while clerks and businessmen flowed past them like water around stones. "He might not even be here," Adrian muttered. "He's here. Friday afternoons, he reviews acquisition reports. He's a creature of habit." "How do you know that?" "I asked his former secretary, the one he fired for being late 3 times. She was very forthcoming after I bought her lunch." Adrian looked at her like he was seeing someone new. Maybe he was. The doorman returned. "Mr. Grayson will see you. 4th floor, office at the end of the hall." The lift was brass and glass, rising with mechanical precision. Evelyn's reflection stared back at her from the polished walls. Pale, composed, wearing a traveling dress that was fine but not fashionable. She looked like exactly what she was, minor nobility out of their depth. Good. Let him think that. The 4th floor was all dark wood and muted colors, designed to make visitors feel small. The hall stretched longer than it needed to, doors closed on either side, silence pressing in like water. Grayson's office was at the end, exactly as the doorman said. The door was open. Malcolm Grayson sat behind a desk the size of a dining table, papers spread in front of him like battle plans. He was younger than Evelyn expected, early 40s maybe, with sharp features and sharper eyes. His suit probably cost more than most people earned in a year. He looked up as they entered and smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Duke, Duchess, this is unexpected." He gestured to the chairs facing his desk. "Please, sit." They sat. Evelyn set her portfolio on her lap, hands folded over it. "I'll be direct," Grayson said. "You're here about the corridor properties. You've locked down 4 out of 5 and you're worried about Millbrook. Smart play, actually. Faster than I anticipated." "You anticipated it?" Adrian said. "Of course. Anyone competent would have done the same. The question is whether competence is enough." He leaned back, fingers steepled. "Here's what I know. Ironvale's finances are better than they look, but not as solid as you'd like. You've been rebuilding for 4 years and the work is good. I've seen the numbers. But you're still vulnerable. One bad harvest, one major expense, and those pretty contracts you just signed become liabilities you can't afford to honor. And you think buying Millbrook gives you leverage to exploit that vulnerability," Evelyn said. "I think owning Millbrook gives me options, which is the same thing." He pulled out a folder, slid it across the desk. "Here's my counteroffer. I'll withdraw my bid on Millbrook, completely. In exchange, you sell me a 30% stake in the corridor's collective operations. Not the land, the operations. Transport contracts, processing rights, revenue streams. I become a silent partner. You keep control, I get returns." Adrian started to speak, but Evelyn cut him off. "No." Grayson's eyebrows lifted. "You might want to hear the terms before—" "I don't need to hear them. The answer's no." "Duchess, with respect, you're not in a position to refuse partnership. My resources could stabilize your— Your resources would gut my autonomy. You'd be a silent partner for exactly as long as it took you to find an angle to take majority control." That's what you do. Buy in low, leverage up, force out. Evelyn opened her portfolio, pulled out a document. The Westmore estate. You bought a 20% stake 3 years ago. Within 18 months, you'd leveraged that into 51% and dissolved the family's operational authority. They're still technically owners. But you're the one collecting profits. Grayson's smile thinned. You've done your research. I've done more than research. I've built a corridor network that doesn't need your money or your expertise. What I need is for you to stop trying to carve it up. Then we're at an impasse. Because I'm not leaving the table empty-handed. You won't. Evelyn pulled out another document. I'm prepared to buy Millbrook myself. Direct purchase, cash payment, 10% above your offer to the current owner. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Grayson leaned forward. You can't afford that. Can't I? Evelyn slid the document across. Iron Vale's liquid assets, verified by 3 independent banks. More than sufficient to cover the purchase and still maintain operational reserves. Grayson scanned the numbers. Something flickered across his face. Not quite anger, but close. Where did you get this kind of capital? I saved it. Every efficiency improvement, every renegotiated contract, every penny I didn't spend on hunting lodges or club memberships or mistress consultation fees. 4 years of surplus, compounded and invested. She met his eyes. You looked at Iron Vale and saw weakness because you assumed incompetence. You assumed wrong. Even with this, he tapped the document, buying Millbrook doesn't solve your problem. The owner wants out. He doesn't care who pays him. He'll take the fastest exit. Then I'll give him the fastest exit. I've got a courier standing by with a contract and bank draft. The moment I send word, he delivers both to Millbrook. The owner can sign and deposit the money today. Your offer requires solicitors and processing time. Mine is immediate. Grayson sat back, his expression unreadable. You came to London to negotiate. This isn't negotiation. This is a declaration. I came to London to end this, on my terms or yours. I'm not particular, but I'm not leaving until it's settled. Adrian had gone very still beside her. She could feel his tension, could sense him wanting to intervene, to soften her edges, to make this more palatable. But he stayed silent. And that silence was louder than any words. Grayson studied them both for a long moment. Then he did something Evelyn didn't expect. He laughed. You know what's interesting, Duchess? Most people in your position would have come here asking for mercy, maybe offering me a smaller piece just to make me go away. You came here to tell me I've already lost and I just don't know it yet. He stood, walked to the window overlooking Mayfair. That takes guts. Or stupidity. I'm not sure which. Does it matter? Not really. He turned back. Here's the situation. I could keep fighting you. Buy Millbrook out from under your offer. Tie up the corridor and legal challenges. Make your life expensive and complicated for the next 3 years. I've got the resources. You'd win eventually. Your foundation's too solid now. But eventually isn't the same as easily. What are you proposing? A different kind of partnership. Not operational. Informational. You've clearly got a network that's feeding you intelligence I didn't expect. Property histories, financial patterns, owner psychology. That's valuable. He returned to his desk. I withdraw from the corridor entirely. No Millbrook, no challenges, no interference. In exchange, when I'm looking at rural acquisitions, I hire you as a consultant. Anonymous, if you prefer. You give me the kind of analysis that just backed me into a corner. I pay you market rate. Evelyn blinked. Of all the directions this could have gone, that wasn't one she'd mapped. You want to hire me? I want to hire whoever did the research that let you walk in here with a strategy this tight. If that's you, yes. If it's someone you employ, I want access to them. Grayson's smile was different now. Genuine, maybe even impressed. I don't lose often, Duchess. When I do, I try to learn from it. This is me learning. Adrian finally spoke. That's assuming we trust you to honor an agreement. Fair point, which is why I'll put it in writing. Contract terms, confidentiality clauses, payment schedules, ironclad. If I violate, you get financial penalties that would make the Millbrook purchase look cheap. He pulled out paper, started writing. I'll have my solicitor draft it today. You can review with your own legal counsel. If you don't like the terms, walk away. The corridor withdrawal stands either way. Evelyn watched him write. Watched his hand move with the same precision he probably applied to every business decision, calculated, efficient, ruthlessly practical. She'd come here expecting a fight. She'd gotten something stranger, respect, maybe, or at least recognition. I'll need to see the contract before I agree to anything, she said. Of course, I'll have it delivered to wherever you're staying by this evening. Review it, modify it if needed, send it back. We'll finalize on Monday. He looked up. Where are you staying? The Langham, Adrian said. Grayson's expression flickered. The Langham was expensive, a statement hotel, not where struggling nobility usually lodged. Of course you are, he said quietly. Then to Evelyn, you rebuilt an entire estate in secret for 4 years. You constructed a legal fortress I didn't see until I was already inside it. You tracked my patterns well enough to know I'd take this meeting. And you walked in here with enough capital to outbid me on a property I thought was secured. He set down his pen. Who are you, actually? Someone you underestimated, Evelyn said. Apparently you're not the only one. She stood. Adrian followed her lead. I'll expect the contract by 8, she said. If the terms are acceptable, you'll have my answer Monday morning. And if they're not, then you'll have my refusal Monday morning, and we'll proceed with the Millbrook purchase independently. Either way, the corridor stays whole. Grayson nodded slowly. Fair enough. They turned to leave. Evelyn was at the door when Grayson said, Duchess? She looked back. Your husband's lucky. I hope he knows that. Evelyn's smile was small and sharp. He's learning. The lift ride down was silent. Adrian looked like he'd been hit over the head with something heavy and was still processing the impact. They made it to the street before he finally said, What just happened? We won, Evelyn said simply. Or we're about to, assuming the contract's legitimate. He offered you a job. He offered me consulting work. There's a difference. You'd work for him? After everything, I'd work for myself. He'd pay for my expertise. If the terms protect our interests and don't compromise the estate, why refuse? She started walking, Adrian hurrying to keep pace. Men have been selling their knowledge for profit since commerce existed. Nobody questions it. I do the same thing, and suddenly it's complicated. That's not what I meant, isn't it? She stopped, turned to face him on the crowded London street. People flowed around them, indifferent. For 4 years, I've built things in secret because the alternative was watching you destroy them through neglect. Now I've got an opportunity to use what I've learned, get paid for it, and protect Ironvale at the same time. Tell me what part of that I should refuse. Adrian opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. Nothing. You should refuse nothing. I'm still catching up to who you actually are. Then catch up faster, because I'm not slowing down. She walked on. Behind her, she heard Adrian laugh, short, sharp, startled. What? She called back. Nothing. Just realizing I've been married to a stranger for 4 years, and she's terrifying. You said that already. It bears repeating. They returned to the Langham as London slid into evening. The hotel was everything Adrian's choice suggested. Marble and velvet, chandeliers dripping crystal, staff who moved like ghosts and charged like thieves. Evelyn had argued against staying here when Adrian suggested it on the train. Now she understood why he'd insisted. If we're meeting Grayson on his territory, we don't arrive looking desperate, Adrian had said. We arrive looking like we belong in the same world he does. He'd been right. The porter who'd sneered at them that morning would have treated them differently if they'd emerged from the Langham instead of King's Cross Station. Their suite overlooked Regent Street, 2 bedrooms, a sitting room, windows that framed London like a painting. Evelyn stood at the glass, watching the city light up against the gathering dark. Adrian came to stand beside her. Are you going to take it, the consulting work? Depends on the contract. That's not what I asked. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. 4 years ago, when I realized the estate was dying, and you weren't going to save it, I had a choice. I could leave, or I could fix it. Leaving would have been easier, probably smarter, but I couldn't. She stopped, searching for words. I couldn't let it die just because nobody else cared enough to keep it alive. I should have cared. Yes, you should have. She didn't soften it. But you didn't, so I did. And in doing that, I learned I was good at things I never knew I could do. Strategy, negotiation, long-term planning, building systems that work even when people fail. She turned to look at him. Grayson's offering me a chance to use those skills beyond Ironvale, to prove they're real, that I'm not just competent in one isolated case, I'm actually good at this. You don't need to prove anything. Maybe not to you, but to myself. Yes, I do. Adrian nodded slowly. Then take it, if the terms are right. And if they're not, we'll negotiate until they are. We? You think I'm letting you walk into contract discussions with Malcolm Grayson alone? I've seen what happens when you negotiate. I want to watch. Evelyn felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness, still not that, but maybe the beginning of partnership. The thing marriage was supposed to be and never had been. He'll try to undervalue the work, she said. Then we'll correct him. He'll want broad access to information. Then we'll define specific boundaries. He'll push. Then we'll push back. Adrian's smile was grim. I've spent 4 years being useless. Let me be useful now. The contract arrived at 7:30, delivered by a clerk in Grayson's livery. 47 pages, dense legal language, terms and clauses that required 3 readings to parse. They worked through it together. Adrian reading aloud, Evelyn making notes, both of them stopping to debate interpretation, argue over implications, map out scenarios where the language could be weaponized against them. By midnight, they had a list of 17 modifications. He's not going to accept all of these, Adrian said. He doesn't have to accept all of them, but he'll accept most. The critical ones are non-negotiable: confidentiality protections, work scope limitations, payment schedules. The rest we can compromise on. And if he refuses the critical ones, then we walk away. The corridor's secure either way. Evelyn set down her pen, stretched. Her back ached from hunching over the desk. But he won't refuse. He's too smart. He knows he lost today, and this contract is his way of converting loss into opportunity. He needs it to work as much as we do. Adrian poured tea from the service the hotel had sent up. It had gone cold hours ago, but neither of them cared. When you confronted me at breakfast, he said quietly, I thought you'd lost your mind, or that I'd lost mine. The idea that you'd been running the estate without me knowing, it was impossible, insulting even. And now? Now I think it's the only reason we're still here, the only reason Ironvale exists. He met her eyes. I'm sorry. I know that's inadequate. I know sorry doesn't give you back 4 years, but I am. Profoundly, completely sorry. Evelyn took the tea he offered. Sorry's a start, but I need more than sorry. I need you to actually show up, not just for crisis management, but for the daily work, the decisions, the problems, the 1,000 small things that keep this place alive. I will. I am. He paused. It's strange. For years I thought being Duke meant hosting parties and signing papers and looking dignified. I didn't understand it meant this. Actual work. Actual responsibility. Most people in your position never figure that out. Most people in my position don't marry someone who'll shatter teacups to make a point. Evelyn almost smiled. That was effective, wasn't it? Terrifying and effective. I haven't forgotten the sound. They finished the tea in silence. Outside, London had quieted to a murmur, distant wheels, late voices, the city breathing in its sleep. We should rest, Adrian said finally. Tomorrow we send the modifications back. Then we wait. I hate waiting. I've noticed. Evelyn stood, gathered her notes. At the door to her bedroom, she paused. Adrian? Yes? Thank you for coming to London, for sitting through that meeting without trying to take over, for letting me lead. You've been leading for 4 years. I'm just finally following. She nodded, closed the door, leaned against it in the dark. 4 years of invisible work. 4 years of silence and strategy and slowly rebuilding an empire nobody noticed. And now, this. Recognition. Respect. The beginning of something different. She wasn't sure what to do with it yet, but she'd figure it out. She always did. The response from Grayson came Sunday morning. The clerk who delivered it looked exhausted. Apparently he'd been working all night on revisions. Evelyn read through the modified contract while Adrian watched. Grayson had accepted 14 of their 17 changes. The 3 he'd pushed back on were minor: payment timing, reporting frequency, contract renewal terms. Nothing that compromised their core protections. "It's good," she said. "Good enough to sign?" "Good enough to accept. We'll sign Monday when we finalize." They spent the rest of Sunday walking London. Not the fashionable districts where Adrian's clubs were, but the commercial areas, docks and warehouses, markets and merchant halls. Evelyn wanted to see how other operations ran, what systems they used, what inefficiencies she could spot. Adrian followed, asking questions, taking notes, learning. Monday morning, they returned to Grayson's office. This time, the doorman greeted them with something approaching deference. Word had spread, apparently. The Duke and Duchess, who'd backed Malcolm Grayson into a corner, were worth remembering. Grayson was waiting in the same office, the contract laid out on his desk like a treaty. His solicitor sat beside him, an older man with tired eyes and careful hands. "Duchess? Duke? Shall we finalize this?" They sat. Went through the contract page by page, clause by clause. Grayson's solicitor made notes. Adrian asked clarifying questions. Evelyn marked 3 final minor adjustments. Wording changes that tightened protections without altering substance. Grayson approved them without argument. By noon, they had 3 signed copies. One for Grayson, one for Ironvale, one for the solicitor to file. "Pleasure doing business," Grayson said, shaking Evelyn's hand. His grip was firm, respectful. "I'll send the first consultation request in 2 weeks. Small acquisition in Derbyshire, nothing complicated. Consider it a warm-up. I'll have the analysis back within 3 days of receiving the materials." "I'm sure you will." He turned to Adrian. "Your Grace, you've got a remarkable wife. I hope you're aware." "Getting more aware every day," Adrian said. They left the office together. The lift ride down felt different from the ride up 3 days ago. Lighter, maybe. Or just less uncertain. On the street, Adrian hailed a cab. "King's Cross?" "King's Cross," Evelyn confirmed. The ride through London felt like traveling through a different city than they'd arrived in. Same streets, same buildings, but Evelyn saw them differently now. Not as obstacles or threats, but as territory she'd navigated and survived. The train north was less crowded than the one south had been. They had a compartment to themselves again. Evelyn pulled out the signed contract, read through it one more time, confirming every clause. "You keep checking it," Adrian observed, "making sure it's real." "It's real. You made it real." He paused. "What happens when word gets out? That you're consulting for London investors? Some people will think I'm betraying my class. Some will think I'm overreaching. Some won't care." Evelyn folded the contract, tucked it back in her portfolio. "But the ones who matter, the tenants, the staff, the people who depend on Ironvale staying stable, they'll understand, because this protects them too." And Camille? Evelyn hadn't thought about Camille in days. The woman seemed like a relic from a different life. The mistress at the breakfast table, the false consultant, the weak point Grayson had tried to exploit. "What about her?" "She's still at the estate. Or she was when we left. Mrs. Halloway was supposed to handle her departure, but she's gone by now. Mrs. Halloway doesn't make mistakes." Evelyn looked out the window. "And if she's not gone, she will be before we arrive. I'm not interested in confrontation, just removal." "You're not angry?" "I was angry. 4 days ago I was furious, but anger's exhausting, and I've got better things to spend energy on." She met his eyes. "Camille was a symptom, not the disease. The disease was your neglect, and you're treating that now, so she's irrelevant." Adrian nodded slowly. "That's remarkably practical. I've had 4 years to practice being practical." The countryside slid past, fields turning from green to gold, harvest season approaching. In a few weeks, the estate would be busy with autumn work. Crops to bring in, equipment to store, preparations for winter. Evelyn felt something settle in her chest. Not quite peace. She wasn't built for peace anymore. But certainty. Maybe. The knowledge that she'd fought for something and won. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. They arrived at Ironvale just before sunset. The estate rose from the landscape like something inevitable. Stone and permanence, history and future tangled together. Peters was waiting at the main entrance, his face carefully neutral. "Your Graces, welcome home. Any problems while we were gone?" Evelyn asked. "None. Mrs. Halloway managed the household. The corridor contracts remained secure. And Miss Devereaux departed Saturday morning. Departed voluntarily? After a conversation with Mrs. Halloway that I'm told was brief and definitive. Peters's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. The household is pleased by her absence. I'm sure they are. Evelyn handed him her traveling case. Is the study unlocked? Of course, Your Grace. The study felt different when Evelyn entered it. Same desk, same maps, same ledgers, but the weight had changed. 4 years of secrecy and silence had been replaced by something more open, more honest. She spread the London contract on the desk next to the corridor property agreements. Side by side, they represented different kinds of victory. One defensive, one offensive, protection and expansion. Adrian appeared in the doorway. Mrs. Halloway's preparing dinner. She seems unusually cheerful. Camille's gone. That would cheer anyone. Should I ask what Mrs. Halloway said to her? Absolutely not. Some things are better left mysterious. Evelyn looked at the contracts again. We need to tell Peters and Mrs. Halloway about the consulting work. They deserve to know before it becomes public. Agreed. Tomorrow? Tonight, after dinner, in here. She paused. And Adrian? We tell them together. Not me briefing them while you observe. Together, as partners. Something crossed his face, gratitude maybe, or relief at being included. Together, he agreed. Dinner was roast lamb and early autumn vegetables, prepared by a kitchen staff that seemed lighter than they'd been in days. News of Camille's departure had clearly spread. Mrs. Halloway served with efficient satisfaction, her approval radiating in every precisely placed dish. Afterward, Evelyn and Adrian gathered Peters and Mrs. Halloway in the study. The four of them stood around the desk. The Duke, the Duchess, the estate manager, the head of household. 4 people who'd kept Ironvale alive through very different kinds of work. We need to tell you what happened in London, Evelyn said. She walked them through it. The meeting with Grayson, the confrontation, the contract offer, the terms they'd negotiated. Peters listened with the careful attention he brought to crop reports. Mrs. Halloway's expression shifted from surprise to something that might have been pride. When Evelyn finished, Peters said, You've secured the corridor and gained a revenue stream. That's exceptional work, Your Grace. We secured it, Evelyn corrected. You held the estate together while we were gone. Mrs. Halloway handled the... She paused. Difficult personnel matter. None of this works if the foundation isn't solid. And you two are the foundation. Mrs. Halloway's eyes were bright. Does this mean the estate's finally stable? Actually, truly stable? More stable than it's been in a generation, Adrian said, which is entirely thanks to my wife's work. I'm just starting to help. Better late than never, Your Grace, Mrs. Halloway said, and the gentleness in her voice took any sting out of it. Peters cleared his throat. If you're taking on consulting work, you'll need space and time to do it properly. I can handle more of the daily estate management, free you up for the analysis work. That would help. Thank you. And I can ensure the household runs without requiring your attention, Mrs. Halloway added. You've trained us well enough, Your Grace. We know what you'd decide in most situations. We can act on your behalf. Evelyn felt something catch in her throat. For 4 years, she'd operated alone, trusting almost no one, carrying everything herself. Now here were 2 people offering to carry pieces of the weight without being asked. I'd appreciate that, she said quietly. Both of you. They talked for another hour, mapping out delegation strategies, communication systems, decision-making hierarchies. By the time Peters and Mrs. Halloway left, the study felt less like a war room and more like a workspace, a place where actual partnership happened. Adrian poured brandy from the study's hidden cabinet. To victories? To survival, Evelyn countered. Victories are just survival with better timing. They drank. Outside, Ironvale settled into night, windows going dark, the estate breathing in its sleep. What happens now? Adrian asked. Now we harvest. We finalize the Millbrook purchase. We prepare for winter. We wait for Grayson's first consultation request. Evelyn set down her glass. We keep building. Not in secret this time. No, not in secret. Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I want to learn. Actually learn. Not just observe while you work, but understand how to do it myself. The contracts, the negotiations, the systems, all of it. That'll take time. I have time. And I owe you 4 years of attention. Consider this interest. Evelyn looked at him. This man who'd been a stranger in her house for so long, who was trying, fumbling, learning how to be something better. All right, she said. We start tomorrow. Early. You'll shadow me through a full day of estate work. See what it actually takes. I'll be ready. You'll be exhausted, but you'll be ready. He smiled. Fair warning accepted. They stood there in the quiet study, two people who'd started as strangers and were slowly, awkwardly becoming partners. It wasn't romance, it wasn't even friendship yet, but it was honest. And after 4 years of lies and silence, honesty felt like its own kind of victory. Evelyn picked up the contracts one more time. The corridor secured, the consulting work arranged, Iron Veil stable. Not perfect, never perfect, but solid. She'd spent 4 years invisible, building in shadows, protecting something nobody else seemed to care about. Now people were starting to notice, starting to see, and she was just getting started. The rain came down in sheets, turning London streets into rivers of gray that soaked through Evelyn's boots before they'd made it 3 blocks from the hotel. She didn't slow down. Adrian struggled to keep pace, one hand gripping his hat against the wind, the other clutching the leather folder of documents. "We could wait," he shouted over the downpour. "Come back when it's—" "No!" Evelyn's voice cut through the storm. "He'll expect us to wait, to be reasonable. We go now." Grayson's office occupied the 3rd floor of a granite building near Threadneedle Street. New construction, all sharp angles and expensive glass. The kind of place designed to remind visitors that money here was serious, modern, unforgiving. They climbed the stairs dripping water, leaving a trail across marble that made the secretary at the front desk look up in alarm. "We're here to see Mr. Grayson," Evelyn said. The secretary, a young man with spectacles and the pinched expression of someone trained to turn people away, glanced at his appointment book. "Mr. Grayson doesn't take unscheduled meetings. If you'd like to arrange, tell him the Duchess of Ironvale is here about the river corridor. Tell him I have contracts he needs to see. Tell him—" Evelyn leaned forward, water dripping from her coat onto his pristine desk. "That if he doesn't see me in the next 5 minutes, I'm walking to the Times with a story about predatory land acquisition that will make his name famous for all the wrong reasons." The secretary's face went pale. "Please wait here." He disappeared through a heavy oak door. Adrian moved close to Evelyn, speaking low. "You're bluffing about the Times." "Of course I'm bluffing, but he doesn't know that." "And if he calls the bluff?" "Then we find out if his reputation is worth more than the corridor." The door opened. The secretary emerged, looking shaken. "Mr. Grayson will see you. 10 minutes." "We'll take 20, Evelyn said, and walked past him before he could object. Malcolm Grayson's office was exactly what she'd expected. Dark wood, leather chairs, walls lined with framed maps of properties he'd acquired and dissected. The man himself stood at the window, watching the rain, his back to them. He was younger than Evelyn had imagined, maybe 40, with the kind of posture that suggested military training or brutal self-discipline. "Duchess," he said without turning, "you're more persistent than I anticipated. You're more predictable than your reputation suggested." That got him to turn. His eyes were pale, assessing, the kind of eyes that calculated value in seconds and dismissed anything that didn't meet the threshold. "You came to negotiate," he said, "or to beg. I'm curious which." "Neither. I came to end this." Grayson gestured to the chairs. "Sit. You're dripping on my carpet." Evelyn sat. Adrian remained standing, the folder still clutched in his hands. "I'll save us both time," Grayson said, settling into the chair behind his desk. "Your estate is crumbling. You've dressed it up nicely, new contracts, better yields, clever bookkeeping, but the foundation is rotting. Your husband's family debts, your lack of capital reserves, your dependence on a single transportation corridor. One bad harvest, one market shift, and Ironvale collapses. I'm offering you a way out before that happens." "Is that what you tell yourself?" Evelyn's voice was steady. "That you're doing us a favor?" "I don't need to justify my business to you." "Good. Because I'm not interested in your justifications. I'm interested in facts." She nodded to Adrian, who opened the folder and began laying documents on Grayson's desk. 4 properties along the corridor have signed exclusive contracts with Ironvale, long-term agreements with termination penalties that make them worthless to acquire. The fifth property, Millbrook, has documented operational liabilities that make it a legal nightmare for any investor with proper due diligence. Grayson glanced at the papers but didn't touch them. I've seen your contracts. They're aggressive but not unbreakable. And Millbrook's issues are manageable. Are they? Evelyn pulled out another document. Millbrook's owner has 3 outstanding complaints with the Regional Transport Authority. If those complaints escalate to formal investigation, and they will, because I'll make sure of it, any property transfer becomes subject to regulatory review. That review takes 6 months minimum. By then, the corridor's seasonal contracts will have renewed with other operators. Your investment timeline collapses. You're threatening to sabotage. I'm promising to enforce existing regulations. There's a difference. Evelyn leaned forward. You came after Ironvale because you thought we were vulnerable. A quiet estate, an absent duke, easy pickings. You didn't account for the possibility that someone was actually running the place, that someone had spent 4 years preparing for exactly this kind of attack. Grayson's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Recalculation. Even if everything you're saying is true, he said slowly, you're still overextended. You've locked down 4 properties with contracts that require sustained capital to maintain. 1 operational failure, 1 unexpected cost, and you'll be forced to renegotiate on weaker terms. I can afford to wait. Can you? That depends. Evelyn pulled out the final document, the one she'd prepared last night, sitting in the hotel room while Adrian slept. How much do you know about the Ashford Textile Cooperative? Grayson went very still. Margaret Ashford's weaving house isn't just a single property, Evelyn continued. It's the cornerstone of a regional cooperative. 8 smaller operations that use her facility as a processing hub. If she signs an exclusivity agreement with Ironvale, those 8 operations come with her, which means any investor trying to control the corridor doesn't just need Ashford's property. They need agreements with 9 separate owners, all of whom have profit-sharing clauses that make individual acquisition economically non-viable. She placed the document on top of the others. Margaret signed yesterday. The cooperative ratified this morning. Grayson picked up the paper, read it. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. You're bluffing, he said. Call Margaret Ashford and ask her yourself. Or better yet, send your solicitor to the cooperative's offices. They'll confirm everything. Evelyn's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. You thought you were buying access to a corridor. What you'd actually be buying is an expensive, isolated set of properties with no functional transportation network and no processing capacity. I've made sure of that. The silence that followed was heavy. Outside, the rain hammered against the windows. Inside, Grayson's fingers drummed once against his desk, then stilled. What do you want? He said finally. I want you to withdraw publicly. Announce that after thorough review, the Ironvale corridor doesn't meet your investment criteria. Make it business, not personal. And then I want you to leave us alone. And in exchange, I don't pursue the regulatory complaints against Millbrook. I don't talk to the Times about your acquisition methods. And I don't make sure every estate owner in England knows how badly you misjudged this situation. Grayson's smile was thin. You're threatening my reputation. I'm offering to protect it. If you withdraw now, you're a smart investor who recognized a bad deal. If you fight this and lose, and you will lose, you're the man who got outmaneuvered by a country duchess no one's ever heard of. Which story would you prefer circulating in your clubs? Grayson stood, walked back to the window. For a long moment, he said nothing. Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her breathing even, her expression neutral. Finally, Grayson said, You've built something impressive. Most people in your position would have crumbled or sold. Most people in my position don't have a choice. Everyone has a choice. You chose to fight. That's rare. He turned back. I'll withdraw, but not because you've threatened me, because continuing would cost more than the corridor's worth, and I don't make emotional investments. I don't care why you withdraw, just that you do. You'll have the announcement by end of week. Grayson's eyes were cold but not hostile. But understand something, Duchess. You've won this round because you were more prepared than I expected. That doesn't make you invincible. It makes you lucky. Luck is what people call preparation when they didn't bother to do their own. Something that might have been respect flickered across Grayson's face. Your husband is a fortunate man. My husband, Evelyn said, standing, is learning to be a smart one. There's a difference. She collected the documents, leaving only the cooperative agreement on his desk. Keep that. Frame it if you want. Consider it a reminder that assumptions are expensive. They left. The rain had lessened to a drizzle by the time they reached the street. Adrian exhaled sharply, his hands shaking slightly as he handed the folder back to Evelyn. That was... He stopped. I thought he was going to throw us out. He considered it, but his calculations were faster than his pride. That's what makes him good at what he does. Evelyn tucked the folder under her arm. It's also what makes him predictable. You weren't sure he'd withdraw. No. But I was sure that if he analyzed the numbers honestly, withdrawal was his best option. The question was whether he'd let ego override logic. Adrian laughed, a slightly unsteady sound. You gambled our entire estate on a guess about a stranger's personality. I gambled on 4 years of research, preparation, and strategic positioning. His personality was just the final variable. She glanced at him. You're shaking. I'm allowed to shake. That was terrifying. Yes, it was. They walked in silence for a block. The city moved around them, carriages splashing through puddles, vendors calling from shop fronts, the vast indifferent machinery of London carrying on. What happens now? Adrian asked. Now we go home. We reinforce the contracts, stabilize the operations, and prepare for whatever comes next. You think someone else will try? Eventually, but they'll have to work harder for it. Evelyn stopped at the corner, waiting for a gap in the traffic. The estate isn't secret anymore. People know I'm running it. That changes the calculation. We're not vulnerable in the same way. Because they'll see you coming. Because they'll know I'm already there. They caught the afternoon train back, the countryside rolling past in shades of green and gray. Adrian slept. Evelyn watched the landscape and thought about what she'd built, what she'd protected, what she'd claimed. 4 years of silence ended in 3 days of noise. She wondered which version of herself was real, the quiet woman at the breakfast table or the strategist in Grayson's office. Then she realized it didn't matter. They were both her. They always had been. When they arrived back at Ironvale, the staff was waiting. Mrs. Halloway stood at the entrance, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes were bright with questions. Your Graces, she said. We weren't expecting you back today. It's finished, Evelyn said simply. Grayson's withdrawing. Mrs. Halloway's composure cracked just slightly. Truly? By week's end, he'll announce publicly. The corridor is secure. The relief that rippled through the assembled staff was almost tangible. Peters, the estate manager, actually smiled, a rare expression that made him look 10 years younger. One of the younger maids let out a small cheer before clapping her hand over her mouth. There's still work to do, Evelyn said before anyone could get too celebratory. We need to audit every contract, ensure all the agreements are filed properly, and establish protocols for future acquisition attempts. This won't be the last time someone comes looking. But we'll be ready, Peters said. Yes, we will. That night, Evelyn sat in the study going through the corridor contracts one more time, making sure every signature was in place, every clause was enforceable, every protection was documented. Adrian found her there after midnight. You should sleep, he said. I will, soon. He pulled up a chair, sat across from her. I need to say something. Evelyn looked up, wary. I was useless, Adrian said bluntly. For 4 years, I was worse than useless. I was an obstacle. You built this estate while I was too busy playing Duke to actually be one. Adrian, let me finish. His voice was quiet but steady. I don't expect you to forgive me. I'm not sure I'd forgive me. But I want you to know that I see it now. What you did, what you've been doing, and I want to learn. Learn what? How to actually manage this place, how to read the contracts, understand the yields, make real decisions instead of decorative ones. He paused. How to be your partner instead of your burden. Evelyn set down her pen. That's going to take time. I know, but I'm asking if you'll teach me anyway. It should have felt like victory, the moment she'd been waiting for, the acknowledgement she'd worked toward. Instead, it felt like the beginning of something more complicated. Partnership required trust. Trust required vulnerability. And vulnerability was something Evelyn had spent 4 years learning to avoid. All right, she said finally. We start tomorrow. You'll shadow Peters for a week, learn the actual operations. Then we'll review the financials together. No shortcuts, no assumptions. If you don't understand something, you ask. Agreed. And Adrian? If you fall back into old habits, if you start dismissing the work or treating this like a hobby, I won't give you another chance. I'll run this estate alone and you can play Duke somewhere else. Adrian met her eyes. Fair enough. After he left, Evelyn sat alone in the study. The contracts were secured, the threats were neutralized, the estate was stable. She'd done what she set out to do 4 years ago, saved Iron Vale from collapse. But somewhere along the way, it had become more than survival. It had become proof. Proof that she was capable, that her judgment was sound, that invisible work had real power. She wondered what came next, now that the work wasn't invisible anymore. The answer came 3 weeks later, during a county assembly meeting Evelyn had never attended before. The gatherings were supposedly for estate owners to discuss regional issues, crop rotations, market regulations, infrastructure needs. In practice, they were social events where men talked business and women talked nothing in particular. Evelyn arrived alone. Adrian had offered to come, but she'd declined. This was something she needed to do herself. The room went quiet when she walked in. 12 estate owners, all men, all watching her with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hostility. Lord Pemberton, who owned the neighboring estate, spoke first. Duchess, we weren't expecting you. I own an estate in this county, Evelyn said calmly. I thought I should participate in county decisions. Your husband usually represents Iron Vale. My husband is learning the operations. I'm running them. She took a seat at the table without waiting for invitation. What's the current topic? The silence that followed was pointed. Then Lord Hartwick, an older man with sharp eyes, said, We're discussing the proposed railway expansion through the northern corridor. It would require coordinated land access from multiple estates. How much land? Approximately 40 acres total, distributed across 5 properties. The railway company is offering standard compensation. Standard compensation is usually half of market value, Evelyn said. What are the actual numbers? Hartwick blinked. We haven't finalized. Then we should finalize before agreeing to anything. A railway expansion increases property values for adjacent lands, but decreases agricultural viability where the tracks run. The compensation should reflect both the immediate loss and the long-term impact on yields. She pulled a notebook from her bag. I'd like to see the railway company's proposal, the actual document, not the summary. Lord Pemberton's face had gone red. Duchess, with all respect, these are complex matters that require reading comprehension and basic mathematics? Evelyn's voice was pleasant. I've been managing those for 4 years. Show me the proposal. Hartwick, to his credit, slid the document across the table. Evelyn scanned it quickly, her eyes catching on the key clauses. They're undervaluing the access rights by at least 30%, she said. And this clause here, perpetual access for maintenance, gives them unlimited entry to your lands whenever they claim maintenance is needed. You'd be giving up control of your own property. The room had gone very quiet. How did you... Pemberton started. I read contracts. It's not a mystical skill. Evelyn looked around the table. Do any of you actually want this railway expansion, or are you accepting it because you think you have no choice? Silence. Then Lord Fairmont, a younger man who'd inherited his estate 2 years ago, said quietly, I think we could negotiate better terms, if we coordinated. Exactly. Evelyn pulled out her pen. Here's what I propose. We form a consortium, all 5 affected properties. We negotiate as a group, not individually. That gives us leverage the railway company can't ignore. We hire a solicitor who specializes in infrastructure contracts. And we don't sign anything until every member of the consortium agrees the terms are fair. That could take months, Pemberton objected. It could, but the railway isn't going to build through someone else's land out of spite. We're their best route. They need us more than we need them. Hartwick was studying her with an expression that had shifted from skepticism to something approaching interest. You've thought about this. I think about everything. It's how I kept my estate from bankruptcy while half this county assumed I was just arranging flowers. That got a few uncomfortable shifts around the table. I move, Fairmont said carefully, that we form the consortium as the Duchess suggests. and that she be appointed negotiator. Seconded, Hartwick said immediately. Pemberton looked like he'd swallowed something sour. This is highly irregular. So is competent estate management, apparently, Evelyn said. But I'm willing to make an exception. All in favor? 4 hands went up. Pemberton abstained but didn't vote against. Motion carries, Hartwick said, a small smile playing at his lips. Welcome to county governance, Duchess. Evelyn gathered her papers. I'll need copies of all correspondence with the railway company, survey maps of the affected lands, and current market valuations for comparable access agreements. Have them sent to Ironvale by Friday. She left before anyone could object. The consortium negotiations took 3 months. The railway company resisted, threatened to reroute, tried to negotiate with individual estates separately. Evelyn held the line. She'd learned 4 years ago that invisible power was effective, but visible power, power that stood in the light and refused to back down, was transformative. They got better terms. 40% higher compensation, limited access rights with strict scheduling, and a profit-sharing clause if the railway exceeded projected revenue within 5 years. Word spread. Other estate owners started approaching Evelyn, quietly at first, then more openly, asking for advice on contracts, negotiations, management strategies. She helped where she could, charged consulting fees where it was appropriate, and built a network of people who respected competence over title. Ironvale itself continued to thrive. The corridor contracts held strong. The tenant yields increased. The staff stayed loyal. And Adrian, slowly, sometimes frustratingly, learned to actually manage the estate instead of just signing papers. It wasn't perfect. He still made mistakes, still occasionally fell into old patterns of assumption and carelessness. But he was trying. And trying, Evelyn had learned, was more valuable than she'd once believed. A year after the confrontation with Grayson, Evelyn stood in the study looking at updated estate maps. The boundaries were the same, but everything within them had changed. Better irrigation, crop rotation, updated equipment, renovated tenant housing. 4 years of invisible work made permanent. Adrian entered carrying 2 glasses of wine. Peter says the autumn harvest is projected to exceed last year by 18%. 20%, Evelyn corrected. I ran the numbers this morning. Of course you did. He handed her a glass. The county assembly is next week. Pemberton's finally agreed to your road maintenance proposal. He'll take credit for it. Probably. Do you care? Evelyn considered. A year ago she would have. The need for recognition, for acknowledgement, had been sharp as broken glass. But somewhere between Grayson's office and the consortium negotiations, that need had softened. She knew what she'd built. She knew what she could do. Whether Pemberton took credit or not didn't change the reality. No, she said. I don't care. The roads get maintained either way. Adrian raised his glass. To roads and railroads and every other infrastructure project you'll somehow end up running. Evelyn smiled. To competence, wherever it's found. They drank. Outside, Ironvale settled into evening, lights appearing in windows, smoke rising from chimneys, the steady rhythm of a place that knew it was secure. Not because of title or legacy or inherited authority, because someone had done the work. Evelyn set down her glass and returned to the maps. There was always more work to do, more contracts to review, more improvements to plan, more challenges to anticipate. But for the first time in 4 years, she wasn't doing it alone in the dark. She was doing it in a study with open doors where people knew to find her, where her work was visible, acknowledged, real, where silence had transformed into authority and authority into partnership, where a woman who'd spent 4 years invisible had become impossible to ignore. The maps showed Ironvale's boundaries clearly, every field, every structure, every carefully managed acre. But Evelyn knew the real boundary wasn't drawn in ink. It was drawn in decisions, in contracts, in the hundreds of small choices that had turned collapse into stability. She'd redrawn those boundaries herself. And now, finally, everyone knew it. Adrian joined her at the desk, studying the maps over her shoulder. What are you thinking about? How much has changed, Evelyn said quietly, and how much hasn't? The estate's barely recognizable from when we married. I'm not talking about the estate. Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then, you're talking about us. We're still married. We still live in the same house. But we're completely different people than we were 4 years ago. She glanced at him. Or maybe we're not. Maybe I was always this person and you just never looked. I think, Adrian said carefully, we're both different. You were always capable, but you're not quiet anymore. And I was always careless, but I'm trying not to be. It wasn't an apology, they were past apologies, but it was acknowledgement, and acknowledgement was enough. The tenants are planning something for the Harvest Festival, Adrian continued. Peters mentioned it, some kind of tribute or recognition. I told him you'd probably hate the attention. I would. I know. But I also think you've earned it, and maybe, he paused, maybe letting them thank you is part of the work too. Evelyn looked at him, surprised. That's remarkably insightful. I'm occasionally capable of insight. It's rare, but documented. She laughed, a real laugh, the kind that had been rare in this house for too long. The Harvest Festival arrived on a clear October day, the kind where the air tasted like apples and wood smoke. The tenants had set up tables in the main courtyard, laid out food and music and decorations that turned Ironvale's formal grounds into something warm and alive. Evelyn had tried to avoid the ceremony part. She'd told Peters she'd make an appearance, say a few words, then retreat. But the tenants had other plans. They presented her with a ledger, hand-bound, leather-covered, every page signed by a different family, messages of gratitude, stories of how the new contracts had changed their lives, children's drawings of the fields and houses and future they now believed in. You gave us security, one of the older farmers said, his voice rough with emotion. Not charity, not pity, just fair terms and honest dealing. That's worth more than you know. Evelyn held the ledger, her throat tight. She'd spent 4 years working for this, for their security, their stability, their future. But she'd done it in silence, never expecting them to know, to care, to remember. Thank you, she managed. I don't have words. You've given us plenty of words over the years, Your Grace, another tenant said, smiling. In those contracts. Every clause that protected us, every term that gave us leverage. We read them, we understood them. You didn't just save the estate, you made it ours too. The celebration lasted into the evening. Music played, children ran between the tables, adults danced and laughed and shared stories of harvests past and future. Evelyn watched it all from the edge, the ledger clutched in her hands. Adrian found her there. You're not joining? I'm not good at this part. The celebrating part? The being seen part. She looked at the crowds. I spent so long invisible that stepping into the light still feels wrong somehow. It's not wrong, it's just different. Adrian held out his hand. Come on, dance with your husband. Give them something to gossip about. Evelyn looked at his hand, then at his face. There was no pretense there, no performance, just an invitation. She took his hand. They danced badly. Neither of them had practiced in years, and the music was faster than formal ballroom standards. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that they were there, together, in front of everyone who'd once thought their marriage was a formality and their estate was dying. What mattered was that they'd both changed enough to make this moment possible. When the song ended, the crowd applauded. Not for the dancing, definitely not for the dancing, but for something else. Some acknowledgement that Ironvale had survived, had thrived, had become something new. Later, when the last guests had departed and the courtyard was quiet again, Evelyn and Adrian walked the grounds. The fields stretched dark under starlight. The river whispered over stones, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called. Do you regret it? Adrian asked. The 4 years of silence, working in secret. Evelyn considered. I regret that it was necessary, but I don't regret doing it. Would you do it differently now? Now I wouldn't have to. But then, I did what I had to do with what I had. That's not regret. That's survival. They walked in companionable silence. Somewhere along the way, they'd shifted from strangers sharing a title to partners sharing a purpose. It wasn't romance, might never be romance, but it was real. And real, Evelyn had learned, was more valuable than any fantasy. The estate needs a new name, Adrian said suddenly. Evelyn looked at him. What? Ironvale. It's old, traditional, inherited. It doesn't reflect what this place is now, what you've made it. We can't just rename a 400-year-old estate. Why not? Everything else about it is new. The contracts, the systems, the management. Why not the name? What would we even call it? Adrian smiled. I was thinking Carrington Vale. After you. Evelyn stopped walking. Adrian, you rebuilt this place from foundation to finish. Your planning, your work, your vision. The name should reflect that. He paused. Unless you want to keep hiding behind my family's legacy. I'm not hiding anymore. Then prove it. Let them call it Carrington Vale. Let everyone who hears the name know exactly who made this place what it is. Evelyn looked out at the estate, her estate, whatever its name. Every field, every building, every carefully managed detail bore her mark. Not invisible anymore. Not secret. Just real. All right, she said, Carrington Vale. The name change took 6 months to process through the county records. There was resistance. Pemberton objected on principle. Several older families grumbled about tradition, but it went through. Because the estate was successful, undeniable, and because Evelyn had enough allies now to make the change inevitable. On a spring morning, the new signs went up. Carrington Vale in wrought iron at the main gate, carved stone markers along the property boundaries. Official correspondence with the updated name. Evelyn stood at the gate watching the workers secure the final sign. The metal gleamed in morning sunlight. Her family name transformed from something private into something public and permanent. Feels strange, she said. Feels right, Mrs. Halloway replied. She'd come to watch the installation, along with Peters and half the household staff. You earned this, every letter of it. I just did what needed doing. That's what makes you different, Your Grace. You saw what needed doing and you did it. Most people just see the need and wait for someone else. The sign settled into place with a satisfying click. The workers stepped back, admiring their work. Evelyn thought about the woman she'd been 4 years ago, silent, invisible, working in shadows because that was the only space allowed. She thought about the breakfast table, the shattered teacup, the moment she'd decided that silence had served its purpose, and it was time for something else. She'd spent 4 years building an empire no one knew existed. Then she'd spent a year claiming it, defending it, transforming it into something no one could deny. And now her name was on the gate. What happens next? Peters asked. Evelyn smiled. Now we keep going. There's always more work to do. But this time, she wouldn't be doing it alone in the dark. She'd be doing it in the light, with her name on the gate and a partnership that had been forged through crisis and choice. This time, when she built something, everyone would know exactly who built it. And that, Evelyn thought as she walked back toward the manor, made all the difference.